All right, folks, 9 o'clock, the webinar has officially started, and welcome to the Hemp Conference, Lessons from the Hemp Field, Navigating Opportunities and Risks of the New Market. My name is Rex Dufour. I work for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, and I manage the California office in Davis, California. We've got a really informative program for you today and some really good presenters, but before I get to them, I want to acknowledge that this event and 3 subsequent events are financed and supported by the Extension Risk Management Education folks up in Washington State who provided funding for this. Originally, these events, 2 in California, 2 in Oregon, were going to be in person, and with COVID, everything went off the rails. And so depending on how COVID infections go, the future events, 2 in Oregon and 1 additional one in California, may be virtualized. My colleague, Ann Beyer, will be monitoring the chat function for any questions, but also she has posted a link to an evaluation of this event. It's an opportunity for farmers to provide feedback about what topics and issues they need more information about, and we'll take that feedback very seriously to inform the content of future events. So please go to that link and fill it out. It'll only take about 5 minutes of your time. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Farmer Resource. This is, NCAT manages the ATRA project, which is a National Sustainable Ag Information Service. It's a great informational resource for farmers and ranchers. It has information in all kinds of formats, so you can digest this information in whatever format you prefer. And we also run a couple toll-free helplines for farmers where you can ask any question about sustainable or organic production or marketing of crops and livestock, and we'll get an answer back to you within a day or 2, as soon as we can. And this service is free of charge. So without further ado, the first speaker today is Dr. Gordon Jones. And on the right, you can see today's program. But Dr. Jones will provide a brief overview of hemp, and then after Dr. Jones, we'll have our farmer panel, Akasha, Phil, and Sandor, and they'll talk about what they do, and we'll ask them some questions, and there will be an opportunity for you folks, you participants, to ask some questions as well, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. And the last session, we'll have Locke Fan of CDFA, the California Department of Food and Ag, talk about rules and regs, and then NCAT's Jeff Shizinski will talk about crop insurance options for hemp. So again, if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please post them in the chat section and will let me know, and we'll try and get to them. And let me introduce to you Dr. Jones, and I'm gonna stop my share and have Dr. Jones go ahead and start his share. Dr. Gordon Jones is an extension agriculture faculty at the OSU Southern Oregon Research and Extension Center located in the Rogue Valley in Oregon. He serves as part of the Production Agriculture Research Consortium within the Global Hemp Innovation Center based at OSU. Gordon conducts research and teaches extension classes and provides technical assistance around pasture, hay, and hemp management, as well as soil fertility, cover crops, and pesticide stewardship in Jackson and Josephine counties. And we're very pleased to have him today. And Dr. Jones, please go ahead and set the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Rex, for that nice introduction. Can you see my screen properly?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thank you for the invitation and the nice introduction. I'm an extension agent in Southern Oregon. This is gonna be a presentation that, while the title says overview of hemp, it's probably more of an overview of hemp productions and things that I've learned and seen over the past several years. The area that I work in happens to be a hotspot of hemp in Oregon. So a few basics on hemp to start with. Hemp is a crop that has been around for a long time and is just facing a a resurgence and maybe a gold rush of interest once again. Here's a document, you can't quite see the date on that, is 1898, where in addition to discussing feeding artichokes to pigs, there are some discussions of hemp and flax there as part of this bulletin. And that's something that there is some old literature on hemp, and slowly but surely we're gaining new sort of scientific and extension knowledge about hemp. But they're, unlike most any crop, you can go and do a Google search or a library search and find 100 years worth of research on basically any economically important crop. That's not the case for hemp, that we've got to go back really pretty far in order to find good information. And that really is a different beast of an animal, where the resurgence and interest in hemp recently has been one that is a essential oil, cannabinoid driven market rather than seed or fiber. But we'll talk about some of those different uses. And so we have this funny distinction. You can't look at a plant or smell a plant and be able to make a determination if it's hemp or it's marijuana. That's like a chemical assay that needs to be done. And there's this legal definition of 0.3% total THC in that plant is the dividing line between hemp and marijuana. And I think that's a relatively arbitrarily selected threshold, but it's what we've got. And that's, I think, a challenge that growers deal with and will continue to deal with, particularly in the CBD hemp market. So let's see, I arrived in Southern Oregon in the summer of 2017, and we had a few thousand acres of hemp growing. And in 2018, there were a few thousand more. These are Oregon Department of Agriculture registered hemp acreage across the whole state. We had a few thousand more acres in 2018. Come December of 2018, there was the passing of the US Farm Bill, and that legalized hemp production across the country, and also like lifted some restraints that faculty like myself were under at the university. Previously had not been permitted to work on hemp because of legal constraints around the university's federal funding. And so got into hemp in 2019, and so did the rest of the world. Oregon saw a dramatic increase in registered hemp acreage and explosion in interest in the crop and change in land use like I've certainly never seen before, and I'm not sure I'll ever see again. The real dramatic change in our landscape. And in Oregon, registered acreage dropped again somewhat in 2020. And I think as time goes on, you will hear some reasons about why that that makes sense, that there was this dynamic flux of registered acreage of hemp in Oregon. So here's just a map of Oregon, and all the orange dots are the locations of individual fields. So my two counties are these two, Jackson and Josephine counties in the southwest corner of the state. We've got about a quarter or a third of all the registered hemp acreage in the state in those two counties. And so while I have a general agriculture appointment and I'm trained as like a forage agronomist, I spend a bunch of time doing hemp because it's it is the hot topic of my time and location. So stepping back into just hemp in general, I tend to think about the sort of like harvestable products that come from hemp. And as we like sort of zoom out across the world and across history, I think about four general classes of material. Those are seeds that are for oil or for protein. Go find my grandfather's Morrison's Feed and Feeding textbook from 1946, and there's a little section in there on feeding hemp seed meal. Currently, however, it is illegal to, or is not permitted to feed hemp or hemp byproducts to livestock. Think about fiber. We know that there's hemp produces a valuable fiber. It's strong and relatively easy to produce, is particularly valuable in maritime systems, is resistant to degradation by saltwater. And the recent boom in hemp has not been these two things. There's a little bit of hemp seed and hemp fiber production that goes on in the United States, but it really is relatively minor. And the explosion of interest that we saw was either hemp for smokeable flower or hemp for biomass for extraction. And so I'm really going to focus on these two things because that is the production that I think we mostly see in the United States, and certainly is the vast majority of the hemp that we see in Oregon. So I'm just going to sort of now like show you a bunch of pictures and walk you through a production cycle. Let me make sure I can see the time in front of me. And whoops. Okay. So hemp is started from seed, and this seed industry is one that we see production sort of in a number of parts of the country, but is uh, relatively nascent to my mind. Seeds are pretty expensive, on the order of $1 a piece, and are generally feminized, which means that the mother plants are treated with silver thiosulfate. Hemp is a dioecious plant. There are male plants and female plants. And when we're harvesting for cannabinoids or essential oils, that the uh, currently accepted wisdom is that we need unpollinated female flowers. And so feminizing seeds means that you have like 98 or 99% of those seeds that are produced will grow female plants and reduce the risk that your crop is seeded or pollinated. We As I sort of talk through this system, it feels to me like hemp growers, at least in my part of the world and much of what I see elsewhere, have adopted a model of agriculture that is one that feels to me like it comes out of illicit marijuana production. That we have a really intensive system. To my mind, what the system that I'll describe is like just about the most expensive way you could grow a crop, and makes sense maybe if you're like in the woods of Humboldt County and you've got 20 plants that you need to baby each one of them. As we scale up into larger, multiple tens of acres in terms of field size, I'm not sure those practices all make sense. But anyway, so we've got seeds that are $1 a piece that are generally feminized, that have been bred to produce high content of cannabinoids, probably mostly CBD. There is some interest in cannabigerol or CBG. These are started in a greenhouse, are then transplanted out into the field. In my part of the country, that happens in June or July, sometimes all the way into August. And so we have this transplanted system, and plastic mulch is a sort of hot topic in the hemp world where I work. The plastic mulch is the sort of most common weed control strategy, and I think works pretty well for many producers that, as part of a system of weed control, can grow a really can grow a nice crop. It does have the challenge that the material that's primarily used is not recyclable in any way. You're putting down between 1 and 200 pounds of plastic per acre, and that goes into the landfill at the end of the season. And while growers are using plastic mulch, we find that some of them rely on that solely as a tool. And so here's an image that's kind of hard to see, but this is beds of plastic mulch that they have planted hemp plants into, but have made no additional effort to control weeds. And so the weeds grow. And maybe that would be another point to make, that my sense of the hemp industry, particularly in Oregon, is that we've seen an influx of people, of producers who don't necessarily have sort of like long history of crop production or field scale agriculture. And so I think as we click through some of these pictures, you'll see that it's like sort of from every angle. In some cases, people are like missing the mark a little bit in a way that makes sense for a new crop that has a lot of new producers in it. So this crop I think was harvested, but really seems like a loss to me. That said, we have a number of producers who don't use plastic mulch, and that can be quite successful. Picture on the left here is a craft Smokeable flower grower, and carefully manages where and how much he irrigates, plans to have hand crews go through, and can grow a pretty clean crop. As compared to this one, and sorry, the picture's kind of blurry here, grew without plastic mulch, really like soaked the whole field with their drip irrigation system prior to planting, and even before they planted it, were battling weeds. And so in this sort of hazy picture, I think they've gotten 6 or 8 people out weed whacking this, what ended up being like a 15-acre field, and went through 2 or 3 times. And they did harvest a crop, but it looked to me from the roadside, this was across the road from my office, looked to me more like a crop failure than a success. And so some tidbits on sort of site selection and other things that I've seen. We've got folks who are growing on hillsides, which I think is an iffy practice for annual cropping systems, but then is worth pulling over and taking a picture for, because they've set their rows up and down the slope of the hill. And that's one of those things of like, I would have thought most folks who are engaging in this scale of agriculture would have had the memo about soil erosion from a century or more ago about the risk that soil moves downhill. We see some like adaptation kind of questions. One of the only like really specific recommendations we get about where do we grow hemp is that we need freely drained soil. Hemp will not grow with wet roots. And so here's a wet patch in a field. The field otherwise looks really very good, but that was the patch you can see is sort of like a muddy tire track there. Those hemp plants died. Other funny thing that's like such a desperate interest to get into the industry in 2019, that doing some other practices that were sort of head scratching. And this is kind of a funny picture. So that we have lots of pear orchards in Southern Oregon, and somebody bought a pear orchard, cut all the limbs off the trees, didn't even have time to take the trees out, set down their plastic mulch and planted what are some like really very leggy hemp starts late in the season. And one of the things that we know about hemp is that it is a bioaccumulator or a phytoaccumulator, good at like pulling various elements and compounds out of the soil. And so this kind of thing really has me scratching my head. This was a production orchard 2 years prior, and they were using these like sort of durable soil herbicides to control weeds and a whole heap of insecticides. And particularly where we have this hemp following orchard production, has me scratching my head about what all is getting pulled up by those hemp plants and where exactly does it end up in the plant. And there is some research on that. It's mostly fiber hemp out of Canada or Europe or Asia. And so that's one of those things that I expect we'll learn more about as time goes on. Let's see, some other things that I've seen out in the field, at least early in the season when plants like look kind of iffy, they're root bound. That they're almost always root bound. Like every plant I pull out of the ground or like go and like, this is like someone's root ball from 2 seasons ago that just as bound up as possible. And that's just, I think, a step of mismanagement going from the greenhouse out into the field. But really, you're going to have a hard time getting water and nutrients into a plant that has like a golf ball size root ball. We've got questions, but not very good answers on things like soil fertility. The hemp growers who have been marijuana growers tell me that, want to hold back on fertilizer at the end of the season, and you expect to see some yellowing or chlorosis of the leaves as maturation takes place. And that's how you know you're at the right level. But I guess I scratch my head on what exactly does that mean? How drive by a field that has yellow leaves at the base of the plant, which seems like remobilization of nitrogen or nitrogen deficiency to my eye. And this is in a variety trial we conducted at the research station where really are showing some nutrient deficiency symptoms, but we don't have good information on sort of like field recommendations for fertilizer for hemp. That there's a little bit of work that's starting to be done, but not in the way that we really can for lots of other crops. We see insect pests in this part of the world of a whole range of sorts, but I think the one that probably appears to be the most economically important is the corn earworm that shows up and will like burrow into those flower buds, and in some cases will like sort of will nip the stem or chew through the stem to some extent, and you'll see these like brown tufts on the top of the field, and that like probably most valuable, like top few inches of the hemp flower are then basically unsaleable. Let's see. We get questions. Probably one of the most frequent questions I get is, how much do you have to water hemp? And I'll let the growers later, I think, may have an answer to this, but is one of those things that still has me scratching my head when somebody wants one answer on how much water does hemp use. That we certainly know that where you are in the world, the day length and the climate will impact how much water hemp requires. But then we don't have a standard set of production practices to follow. And to my understanding of water use, that really is critically important. So here are 3 hemp fields, took pictures of these all within about 10 days of each other in the end of August of last year. And so left-hand side, I see a field where the plants are really pretty big. They're shoulder to shoulder, basically entirely covering the ground. I expect that like on one day in the end of August, those plants are using quite a bit of water. They've got a lot of leaf area and a lot of opportunity to transpire. Within the same week, take a picture of this field where plants have quite a bit of either bare ground or weeds in between them, and they're sort of moderately sized, I expect that uses less water than the field that is shoulder to shoulder with hemp plants. And then in this final image, you can see that they've grown probably a better crop of tremulous puncture vine than they have of hemp. And on any one day, these three fields are going to be using a different amount of water because they got planted on different dates. They manage soil fertility, planting space, genetic selection differently. And so the notion that someone will call me and say, how much water does a hemp plant use? It depends on the system that you're growing it in. And if you're growing really tiny plants for whatever reason, they'll use less water than if you're growing really big bushy ones. And so there's work to be done, both on water use itself, but also on standardizing production system so that you can have something to fit that water use to. That said, we go out and get called out to a field because there are worried about root-borne insects, worried about cutworms in the field. And we do see some cutworm damage on hemp and other parts of the state, and see symptom like this, a really sort of drooping plants, and scratch our head, go put your finger in the soil, it is like dry as dust. And I would have thought that this kind of symptom would have been something that people would cue into, even if you've just like raised a potted plant on your porch or something. That wilted leaves is often a sign that you got to check water. But this was like a 10-acre farm, and the grower just wasn't quite thinking in that way. See some sort of strange looking symptoms in hemp. This grower called us in to look at these plants that he said looked like elephanty, and puzzled over herbicides in the soil, and ended up sending in a sample for virus and viroid screening. And these are symptoms of something called a hop latent viroid, which is a seed-borne viroid that can be mechanically moved around. We don't know a lot about it. It doesn't really cause issues in hops, but has shown up in hemp in the past few years, and not totally clear how economically important it is, but certainly like gets growers worried when they see plants looking funny. Let's see. Then get called out because of like broken branches, and this is like directly underneath a plant, and you can see here that just like in 3 or 4 cases, branches just breaking off of plants. And we like run around in circles for like months with the plant pathologist. We send these things to campus. We're trying to figure out what's going on here. They're just weak plants that they have like been bred with some objective in mind, and having strong branches is not that, particularly when you grow big plants at wide spacing, can have some issues. That as I drive around and see marijuana growers, they will often do some trellising of their plants to prevent this from happening. But then that's a sort of like cost versus value question. Let's see, one other concern that's on folks' mind is pollination. That as we said early on, that most growers are aiming to grow sort of like virgin, unpollinated female flower buds. And hemp naturally is dioecious, and so has male plants. And you can see a couple male plants in these images. Got lots of questions about how far does pollen move, about what is the actual, like, if we were able to thresh those seeds out of biomass, what would the CBD content be, and what is the like sort of economic proposition of having to feminize those seeds and rogue out males versus not worrying about it and losing some level of CBD production? Plenty of questions there, not very many answers. Then the other like big question that we deal with is hot hemp, about the potential that you're going to grow this hemp crop, and prior to harvest, at some point, it's going to creep up above that 0.3% total THC level. And what do we do about it? And that makes that in Oregon, if you exceed that 0.3% THC level in the field, that crop, and you can run it through a different lab, but if it continues to test hot, there's nothing to be done but to destroy the crop. And so a lot of concern about that, a lot of discussion about, is that 0.3% total THC an appropriate threshold or not? So I went and asked our Department of Agriculture for this past season, how many fields actually failed that test? We end up with a pie chart that looks like this. And so this was data as of December 2nd of last year, about 1,800 fields, and only 7% of those fields failed that test. I don't know if I think I probably would have guessed a higher number if I were guessing, but this is just one of those things we don't have a lot of data on. And my best understanding, based on reading literature and some work that's been done at Cornell, is that your cannabinoid content is sort of fixed in ratio genetically, and that if you pick the right genetics, that you'll be able to achieve relatively high CBD contents while staying below that THC threshold. But if we can see here, like the range of these things, somebody ended up with 6% THC at the end of the season. That's just a question of like, you didn't select hemp seeds, you got something else. And that's why that happens, and that the mean and median value are down well below that 0.3% limit. But I think there is a question of like, if absolutely maximizing CBD production is the goal, that I think we have like probably have a legislative limit that we could grow more CBD if you didn't have such a tight THC limit based on how those sort of things function genetically within the plant. And then in terms of harvest, that we see like a whole broad range of harvest strategies, lots of fields getting harvested by hand, lots of attempts on figuring out how to mechanize harvest. Growers this past year I think had better success using these bean picker type harvesters to go through, and that'll strip the leaves and flowers off the plant and leave the stems behind. And so that's relatively workable. I think for the 2019 season, we saw lots of different kinds of harvest equipment, and we mostly saw people like working on broken harvest equipment that was gummed up or non-functional because it just like wasn't quite, you can't just use a combine with a corn header to try to harvest hemp, even if that's the intention. And there's lots more that I can talk about in terms of challenges of drying, processing, and marketing, but I'm seeing that I am just about out of time, and so I'm going to stop there. And if we've got a minute for questions, we'll take them, and I'll be around later. Get more questions, and there's my contact information if you'd like to reach out.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. That was brief but really informative. I do have some questions. You brought up some. And we do have a few minutes here before we have to move on to the farmer panel. But it looks like most of the fields you showed were drip irrigation. I mean, is that pretty much the standard, or what kinds of irrigation strategies are these folks using?
So mostly drip irrigation, that there's sort of like some perceived wisdom that you don't want the plants to get wet. And there's some reality about that. And I think it was the end of the 2019 season. We had rains relatively early in the fall, and botrytis or white mold is a real issue for hemp, that those flowers are like sort of dense and sticky enough. They've been accumulating whatever like spores are floating by for the whole season. And then if they get wet for a prolonged period, they will mildew. And so since we don't have like good information on exactly how you control that botrytis, or exactly what are the conditions that cause it to be problematic in hemp, that people are saying, let's avoid getting the flowers wet. That said, in other parts of Oregon, we see people irrigating with sort of center pivot irrigation. We had a variety trial at the research station. We sort of played a different game in terms of production. We directly seeded it into the ground. We cultivated it with cultivation equipment and watered it overhead with like handline irrigation system. And on some varieties, depending on when they were flowering and when we were irrigating, we did see some botrytis, but it wasn't across the board. Drip irrigation is mostly the deal in our part of the world. There is hemp grown in places that don't require irrigation, but I think you run into more of those mold and mildew and pathogen problems.
Mm-hmm. And do folks fertigate through the drip irrigation, or they just give water and hope that their soil is good enough to grow a crop?
Most, if not all, will do some level of fertigation.
Okay. And also, you had mentioned a seed-borne viroid. Is there any program to provide hemp certified seed that would be free of, pathogens?
Yeah, that there are a number of different land grant universities and laboratories that will do that will certify seed or will at least do seed sort of testing, and which was I think early on, like in 2019, people were there was so much money in it that people were selling all sorts of like sort of suspicious and nefarious things as hemp seed. And so just the like, do you know what the like germination rate is? Do you know that this is actually feminized seed? That those kind of things can be tested for in a lab. The issue with like viruses and viroids is that you have to know to look for them, and there's like viral DNA and everything. And so it's a little bit of like, is this enough of an economic problem to know that we should be looking for it or not? And it was 2019. I was hearing a bunch, and out in I think 3 fields that we found some plants which tested positive for the hop latent viroid. This past season, didn't hear about it at all, and so it's sort of hard to know like those seed sources and mother plants that are that's coming from, and
Okay.
lots of potential problems. And it's sort of in my position, it's like which of these things are like rising high enough in the that like need our work this year or next year, knowing that the industry is going to be different the year after that and the year after that again. How do we like sort of position research that will be expensive and it'll take a long time to do in most cases?
Right, with volatile markets and production levels. Um, One other question, you would, excuse me, um, the corn earworm, which is a moth, or larval form of a moth, um, there's not very many insecticides registered for hemp. How are growers going about dealing with that? I know BT works quite well on corn earworm, but they have to ingest a certain amount first, but that will stop them feeding right away. Uh, what insecticides or how are growers approaching pest management, like a corn earworm and also the cutworm, which is a more difficult critter?
Right. So I can't comment on every state across the country because pesticides are regulated through the state departments of agriculture. What
Right.
Oregon has done is come up with a guide list of things that are not explicitly prohibited from use on hemp. That some pesticide labels will be vague enough that they say like and other like herbaceous plant material, that then opens a window to say they're not explicitly saying don't use this. And those tend to be a set of insecticides that are the like commonly known to be safe. I don't quite remember that acronym, but they're the ones that are on the like, OMRI organic list for the most part. And so that includes things like BT, and there are a couple of strains of BT that are known to be more efficacious against these corn earworms. And that's what people are using. But we don't have good economic thresholds. We don't have good sense of exactly the timing or differential by variety of that. I know the corn earworm is like hot on people's mind in my corner of Oregon. We don't hear so much about it in Eastern Oregon and Central Oregon, but people are spraying BT and a whole heap of other things, either knowing that they're going to be effective or sort of like prophylactically because they've got what they think is what they anticipate as being a high value crop and want to protect it. But we don't have the like sort of systems of integrated pest management to do that in any kind of like well-informed way.
Right. Well, and I notice on the chat there's a question about certified. Well, it's kind of difficult to get certified, NOP certified organic hemp. But what proportion of growers are you working with that do grow what might be considered organic hemp?
That's a good question. There are some, I think, certified organic growers, and there are lots that sort of philosophically are headed in that direction, may not be perfectly following the standards, but there's I think a sentiment and maybe a reasonable one that people are feel like they're trying to grow something that is like kind of close to a medicine, and that it has health benefits for you, and they don't want to, are really concerned about both the real and perceived sort of like potential like contaminants or adulterants in the crop. And so that there are lots of folks who are headed in that direction, will use organic soil amendments where possible. And then, as I mentioned, I don't think there are, maybe they're just starting to be like one or two conventional pesticides which can be used on hemp. But basically, they've got a list of organically compliant materials are the only pesticides that are allowed to be used.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jones. Really good. I'm sure we could go on for quite a long time talking about the nooks and crannies of production, but we're going to move on to our farmer panel, and I will see here. Let me here, Akasha. Let me go to my slide set first. Okay.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Okay, very good. Okay, sorry about that. A little slow on the transition there. The next group of folks we're going to hear from are our farmer panel, and I'm going to introduce all the farmers at once, and then we're going to start off with Akasha. Akasha Ellis, he's the co-founder and farm and operations lead of the Ventura Seed Company. He's dedicated his life to wellness and healing. Early on, he saw the power of hemp after witnessing firsthand how CBD aided his father, who was gravely ill. He quickly moved to pair his passion for farming and Mother Earth with helping people. His mission at Ventura Seed Company was and is to make hemp more accessible to people globally by growing in a way that helps heal our planet as well as our planet's people. And associated with him is Phil McGrath, because he farms partially on McGrath Family Farm. And Phil is a fifth generation farmer on the Oxnard Plain in Ventura County. And that is also the site of Rodale Institute's new California Organic Center. Phil has served on the Ventura County Farm Bureau Board. He's also a member of the Los Angeles Food Policy Council and was part of a group that started the Farm to School program in Ventura County, and is also part of a pilot program designed to develop a local food hub. And his true passion is farm education. And for 25 years, he has conducted farm tours with elementary, high school, and college classes. And I would note, I first met Phil when my hair was not blonde, it was brown. So I've been acquainted with him for about 20 years, I think. And then the last farmer panel is Sandra Bogdan. He has 25 years of experience in hemp, cannabis, and large-scale ag production. He prioritizes organic implementation and thinks that is really important, from large-scale cattle ranches to craft cannabis. He recently started Bogdan Agricultural Systems with his two sons, growing greenhouse, boutique, smokeable hemp flower at a 6-acre facility in Pescadero, which is in kind of north of San Francisco, if you're looking, using organic practices. So Akasha, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Rex. And, thank you, Gordon, for your presentation. It was informative to me also, so I really appreciate that. Yeah, so Ventura Seed Company, we began our hemp project here in January of 2018, looking to actually bring hemp to California and growing it here organically and wanting to actually partner with Phil McGrath. As you heard, he's 5th generation here, and they have a 300-acre farm here. We have 300-acre organic farm. We've got, Driscoll's Berries here. We've got a couple nonprofit and educational centers here, from small scale to large scale. And we leased out 30 acres and somehow convinced the county of Ventura with Steve Sprinkles and the CDFA to allow us to run a regenerative ag under the Regenerative Ag Nonprofit Association to offer hemp to the county. And we successfully did a 30-acre grow in 2018. We weren't really allowed to take the product anywhere off the grounds of the farm. So we had to learn the lessons of how to dry in hoops near the ocean, which I wouldn't recommend anybody to do. And then once the Farm Bill was passed, we were actually able to get our crop certified organic with USDA through a third-party agency with ProCert. So, if anybody has any questions about if they are interested in getting their crop certified organic, we definitely can answer that or help guide you in some direction. So we also did genetics and seed propagation. One of the things that we found was that we couldn't find reliable genetics. And at the time, each state was requiring that somehow those genetics were born from that state, which I don't know quite sure how that's going to happen if the state wasn't growing hemp beforehand. But we were able to bring in genetics from Colorado that was being grown by other genetic companies. And we did our own seed propagation here at the end of 2018 and then began doing genetics, taking genetics in from Oregon and from Colorado and creating our own genetics here in California. When the December 18 Farm Bill Act passed and legalized hemp, we were also did a pilot program in New York in 2018. So we had a dual center doing growing hemp in both locations. Obviously, very different types of environments and climates. When we talked about drip tape being used here, in New York we didn't use any irrigation. We allowed Mother Earth to basically irrigate our plants. And we kind of catapulted into 2019 and were asked to grow close to like 700 acres here in Ventura County. We were contracted out to grow that. Most of us made it through it, but we did have about 60 acres that we were unable to actually find buyers for, but we had contracts for the first 600 acres. So that's something I would lead into later in this conversation with farmers. If they have any ideas about farming hemp, make sure you can definitely find a way to an outlet for that.
Akasha, let me interrupt here just for a second. If you could put your PowerPoint on presentation mode, that would make the...
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. It's just,
are we on it right now?
We can see it, but it's in kind of edit mode. So if you go to the...
how is that? Is that any better?
If you go to the lower right, and then there's this...
I see remote control, and then I see more.
Is there a small icon that looks like a screen?
Yeah, and the lower right.
Is this here?
A little to the left. Keep on going, right there.
Right there?
Nope, right there.
How does that work? Is that good for you guys?
I think you need to click on.
Nope, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
Just took a
good?
while to...
Okay.
All right. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So that leads us into, why maybe we can jump back to why we actually chose Ventura County to grow hemp here in California. And I would say ideally is it was receptive to actually having us grow. It's one of the ideal, it's a beautiful place to be and grow. And it's an ideal climate, I think, for at least smokable hemp, smokable flower hemp. And in speaking with, finding the right community and the right partners to do this with, Phil McGrath and the Ventura County were open to that. We had been searching different counties within California to grow hemp, and this was the ideal location, and they were the most receptive to it at the time. I'm actually gonna let Phil talk for a moment and maybe discuss, some of the benefits he thinks for Ventura County is with hemp too. Since,
Sure.
yeah, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. I thank you for, can everyone hear me all right through the mask? Ventura County is experiencing some terrible spikes right now, and if it's all right, I'd like to leave it on. And I just want to make sure I'm still clear and everyone can hear. Okay. Like Akasha was saying, my family, we have quite a history here. We started off in the 1860s as cattle ranchers, and we did that for 40 years. And then we got into dairy farming in 1910, 1920. After World War II, we started with our row crop farming. And in the mid 90s, I started growing organically because that was my demand with farmer markets and the direct marketing programs I was getting into. My point is that our farm, Ventura County, we have always been about change. And if there's a crop that I want to boast so much about this crop, it does it all. It cleans the soil. It uses very little water. Yeah, there's pests and problems there, but it seems to be a fighter. And the uses it has, it's just one of the best crops. And I saw the writing on the wall. And when Akasha and I met through a mutual acquaintance, I was very, very curious about this crop. And I do remember my father talking about his father growing some. So I think it was grown here either early 19th century or before, but I wanted to get on really about how if you are considering growing it organically, this is a great crop to transition around with. And not that Akasha hasn't had problems. He took on where we're growing this crop has been certified organic for 20 years. And we still had, they are called legacy pesticides in the CBDs. That's why we went from an isolate to a distillate to get rid of some. It has this incredible quality of cleaning the soil. Like everyone in California, we used DDT 70 years ago, 60 years ago, and there's remnants of that in our soil. But for me, Ventura County is experiencing some of the worst drought conditions we've had in weather record recording history. And we're really low on summer crops. There were peppers, some tomatoes. This county right now, I just drove here earlier. It's really about strawberries and celery right now. We're harvesting strawberries in January, but that's when the markets are. I was infatuated by this crop. In 2018, Akasha and his company came here and did a research and development project here. It did all right, but we obviously had the early learning as we go kind of problems. 2019, I think we both did quite well with yields and having it down a little better. But then we got hit with some of local politics. Basically, it was the smell. The counties, the cities, all municipalities were up in arms. We went through a political process that was really mutually, they gave a little, we gave a little. We went from a half-mile buffer that was through an urgency ordinance, and they brought it down to a quarter mile, which is a big help. Like Rex was saying, we have Rodell here. They're doing research and studies and trials, and they're exempt from those buffers. That was a big deal. And then we had the economic problems.
Oversupply.
Yeah, oversupply. I think 2019, 2018, I think the total numbers in America went from 75,000 acres to 475,000 acres in 1 year. And no one thought it could happen, but yeah, farmers are.
One of the biggest things we saw here with Ventura County is in 19, we had 3,500 acres that we grew.
Yeah.
I mean, in 18, it was just maybe 30 or 60 acres total. And then 19, there were 3,500 acres. Last year, there were 200 acres. And we can go into why that happened. Part of it is because of the ordinance that the county put in place, but also just the demand and the supply and the demand side of it.
Yeah.
Phil mentioned one thing here about water. We do have a record here. You can see the last 2 years of the consumption that we've actually used for water here in the county. And I know Gordon was mentioning, we do a drip irrigation here. I've worked on some farms that do a pivot, and I've worked in New York where we don't use any water, no irrigation at all, just natural. So, but as you can see here, per acre for hemp right here, you can get 0.3 that we're using through the whole growth season. And then you can see the different types of crops here that we grow in Ventura County and the difference you see in water usage, which is an interesting little fact. And I'm welcome, more than happy to share what our findings have been with that with others. Quickly going back, I mean, this is our company, Ventura Seed Company. It's my father and brother and I. Obviously, my father's been an advisor. He's still with us today after using CBD and THC to help him with the throat cancer and not having to use any opiates or a feeding tube, which was amazing. And that was over 7 years ago. Some of the growing practices, I mean, this is on our farm here. It's actually, backyard of Phil's backyard here. And this is our tractor and our team putting in the seedlings. You'll typically see, plastic or no plastic. In New York, we did no plastic and we weeded with hose and manual weeding. And then here we also maintain the crops. Let me see if I can get here's our crops after after maybe a month of veg. Typically the plant will grow about 12 inches per week once it comes out of a little stunt, maybe from the seedling, transplanting of the seedlings. The germination is about, I'm jumping around here, but the germination is probably about 3 to 4 weeks. And that way you'll help with that root bound, avoiding that root bound issue that Gordon was talking about when you transplant the seedlings. You can also do, you can do direct seed. Also, that's typically seen with autoflower. We tried transplanting autoflower genetics with seedlings, and that was a disaster. They got basically triggered to go right into flower. So
maybe you should explain what an autoflower is.
Okay.
I'm not sure if everyone.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point, Phil. So with feminized hemp seed, we have CBD and CBG. Both of those were mentioned with Gordon earlier. But you have a photosensitive variety and you have an autoflower. And the autoflower is a rhodoalus. It's a northern species of the plant. It will typically flower regardless of the life duration of the atmosphere with the sunlight. So it's not photosensitive. So you could be at 13 hours, 14 hours, and that plant will automatically flower. And usually it's about a 75 to 85 day range where you'll see that plant actually flowered. Whereas another plant, like if it's photosensitive, if we plant in June, it will flower, it will basically veg until it begins to flower in late August, mid to late August. And then that cycle is usually anywhere between 7 to 12 weeks, depending on that particular photosensitive genetic. The autoflower, again, if you planted it in June, you direct seed it, you'd see in 80 to 90 days, that plant should be at its full maturity and you would be harvesting it.
It's a very funny looking plant. It's just this giant stem that comes,
well, it's different varieties.
It has a little bit more
Yeah.
plant, but it's not the same bush that you're looking at.
You're not going to get the yields.
Yeah.
It'll typically
Yeah.
be a couple ounces per plant rather than a couple pounds per plant that you'll see. Gordon talked about the compliance and testing. I think one of the hurdles that we see as farmers, and I'm sure most of us who are growing hemp, one of the issues that we've run into is, they give you there's a harvest window. Originally, we were given 30 days the first couple years that we were growing hemp. Now we're being asked, as soon as we test the plant for compliance with THC, we're given 15 days. That's the new law
Yeah.
that's coming into effect. And this was a recommendation given through the USDA, and now many of the states are adopting that. Now, I can tell you as a farmer and trying to harvest with issues of labor, issues with weather. I mean, we've had, typically we have the Santa Ana winds that come in late September, early October. We get 78, 80 mile an hour winds. It's very difficult to be harvesting, plants when you've got that kind of wind gust happening. So I think there needs to be a more realistic idea of when, the time window that farmers have to actually harvest their plants for hemp. So those are some of the idiosyncrasies that this particular crop has.
Well, and to be clear, that is just Ventura County. This, I can't say that's true for Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo. We went through our own political process last year of what the neighbors want. They want the crop in and out as quick as possible. That's why they went from 30 days to 15 days. There is some leeway with weather if there is a rain or a storm, but no, it was 3,400 acres, 3,600 acres in 2019. And yeah, it smelled. We had a lot of rain that year. Well, we had actually a substantial amount of rain considering the previous 12 years were drought years. But it made it harder for some farmers to get in and disc the crop down. So the smell lingered. We had communities up in arms. Luckily, I want to say level heads prevailed, and we just got the ordinance completely redone about 2-3 weeks ago, and there is more adjustments for growing the crop in the county.
Yeah, now there's a setback only for a quarter mile within a sensitive area for like a school or a park or a church and a resident. But the issue of harvesting window is still, it's being brought down to that 15-day harvest window, which hopefully the USDA will revise and give, because I know some states have maintained, like Oregon, I think Gordon could answer that, but have maintained still allowing people to harvest for 30 days, which was our original. And even some states are moving back to even, using the Delta 9 as their testing, not total THC. So, I think these measures, some of the biggest risks we face, and those are costs that farmers have to deal with. A lot of that compliance obviously starts with, are the genetics, first of all, hemp, which is key. And then, are you, how, as Gordon mentioned, the THC level will rise as the plant matures, and it's in that ratio of CBD to THC.
Right.
So, when you start getting in the thresholds of 8 to 12% CBD, you're typically going to be seeing the THC rise, and it might go from 0.2 or 0.15, up to 0.3, 0.35. And then you're taking the risk. And you're taking the risk. Yeah. And that is something that's, and that harvest window also makes that risk harder for farmers.
Asha, could you explain a little bit, I'm sorry for the interruption, about
Sure.
Delta 9? You made a reference to that, but
yeah, so it's funny, on the federal level, in 2018, the federal level it was based on Delta 9. And Delta 9 is the psychoactive component that you find in THC that gets you to feel psychoactively high. The total THCA or total THC includes Delta 9 and THCA. And THCA is a non-psychoactive until it is decarboxylated, until it is heated up. And then it transfers over to what we consider to be Delta 9. So if you heat up THCA at some, I don't know what the threshold, I can't speak for science on that side, but when you heat it up to a certain level or you do a test on it, and that's how the lab report tests are done, it converts over to THC, Delta 9. So they use that as a measurement. Typically the plant will have, like at least our genetics will have, anywhere between 0.05 of Delta 9, non-detect Delta 9, or 0.05, 0.1. And then the remaining balance would be THCA. So if you've got 0.2, 0.23, 0.3 THCA, and you add just that little bit of Delta 9, you go over the threshold potentially to 0.4 or whatever. And the states were not required initially, with the testing, that wasn't a requirement of states to have to uphold with it. It was only Delta 9. And then they switched over to total THC. I think there's been recently a Rand Paul out of Kentucky and some other congressmen are now actually trying to raise that limit to 1%, which would really take this stress out of farmers and the risk that they have of losing their crop. Because you can grow, there's plenty of healthy, great genetics out there that are under 1% for sure.
Yeah.
So, and just in regards, I think also, I don't know about the timing here, you could give me to tell me when to stop, Rex, but you know, I think there were some questions. I think maybe people have questions about how the spacing would be with the plants when you're planting. You know, typically, you know, that's going to be based on, and also the genetics. So your genetics, if you've got a freeze, if your last freeze is like June, you know, and your first freeze is like early September, you're looking at like having to use an auto flower. You know, so you really want to be careful about what genetic you're buying. And then of course, if you've got a full season, I would consider, like for us, we don't really freeze here at all. So we could be planting, you know, in May or June, or even July, and then we would be harvesting into September, early October. Now again, so those are photos. You could typically use a photosensitive. You get a higher yield per plant. It's not as precarious. It's an easier plant to work with once it's been, you know, a photosensitive plant. However, you know, the autoflower gives you the exact time, more of the exact time that you want to actually harvest.
Yeah.
So some farmers may actually, you know, want to have that as their basis. But for higher yields, definitely, and higher CBD, you're typically going to go with a photosensitive plant. We plant typically here in early July, the last 3 years, and you know, for us, we harvest beginning of September through the end of, I'd say, middle October. So you know, for us, our plants are already in that just in that veg period of like a month. Our plants are you know, close to 6 feet on average. That's a manageable plant to harvest. And mechanically, you're probably going to want to harvest plants a little bit smaller than that. If you're going to do it hand harvest, you also going to want to be in that range. If you're doing, you know, larger acreage, if you're doing 1 or 2 acres, you can harvest big mama plants if you want. But the spacing that we typically do is between 36 and 48 for ourselves here when we're planting in that second week of July. And then for like you mentioned something about BT, we have used BT in the previous years. This year, in 2020, we did not use it, and we did see we had a pretty big problem with the corny worms.
Cucumber beetle.
Yeah, I mean they were there, and I think, you know, we would probably want to do an aerial spray of BT if we could. It's under OMRI, so it would be allowed. But that's how we would do, is be an aerial spray in probably about a week or two in early August. So you don't want to be spraying when the flower is already pretty dominant coming out with the pistils. You don't want that to happen just to avoid botrytis and other issues.
And I think there has been, I think the industry is catching up. There are more products for hemp as opposed to 2018. I think there's certain.
Yeah, I haven't read any yet myself, but
well,
I know they're talking about it.
Yeah, I know the industry is trying to catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick interruption here about the OMRI, that's Organic Materials Review Institute, for folks that aren't acquainted with that. And there are BT. BT is a Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a formulation of bacteria that is toxic to, the spores are toxic to a wide range of moths and butterfly larvae. There are, however, formulations of BT that are OMRI registered, meaning they're okay for use in organic production systems. And then there are some that are not OMRI listed because of part of the manufacturing process. And I would note, because these are moths, the adult form are moths that if you put up some bat boxes, that will suppress the populations because they fly at night. These moths fly at night. The only predators around at night are bats that would feed on these guys. And so that would be, it's not a miracle cure, but if you support a diverse population of predators, you'll have fewer problems. So just a quick interruption there.
No, that's a great, that's really helpful. I mean, we might try that.
Yeah.
I mean, we did the biologics in our greenhouse. I'm gonna let Sandor talk more on the greenhouses since I know he's doing a lot of that, but that's something we do, you know, and administers the biologics to help with the pest control.
I think the first year you had some lace sweeps.
And we had wasps, predatory wasps,
Yeah.
things of that nature too.
Good point, Rex.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got, I mean, all the things that you mentioned for the pests, you see thrips, caterpillars, leaf miner, aphids. We see all of these issues. Typically in the nursery, there's more thrips and leaf miner and powdery mildew, not as much out in the field. I think a big issue is weeding. I think that's a big cost that most farmers should really take into account. You know, Gordon really talked about, we do use a plastic mulch. We've also done small areas where we haven't used plastic mulch, and we're doing, you know, tests with Rodale to further this, to see, you know, kind of what the difference in cost would be and how we can actually, even like talks of no-till versus till, those kind of little small research plots we're going to be doing. We're even doing we did a soil remediation. We had one little section where we know there was a higher count of cadmium, and we planted hemp there the last 3 years, but they did a soil test prior to us planting in 2020. So we're getting the test back for 2020 after we actually harvested and took another soil test. I'll let Rodale be the ones that come out with that data. And then another big factor could be male culling. I mean, if you've never grown hemp, you definitely should get your understanding of what a male plant looks like. I mean, that was again mentioned in Gordon's slides. The seed, from my experience, when we grow genetics and we have a flower that is full of seeds, and we get it tested, it's usually about, let's say it would be 10 to 12% in CBD in the top flower, whereas if we were having no seeds, it would be in the 15 to 16%. Now, I don't have science to back this up. That's just from my own lab results of me taking flower from the field with no seeds and flower from, you know, with seeds from within the nursery where we're actually propagating the seeds. Let's see here, harvest methods. I mean, we've tried every method you can imagine. I mentioned the first year we did a hand harvest under hoops, but we had we live near the ocean, so we have a marine layer that comes in every night, and, you know, the plant would get dry to 11%.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the moisture would be sucked back up, and we'd come back in the morning, it'd be at 14, 15%. So it took us like 3 months. We had to build these containers, put dryers, dehumidifiers, racks in there. In the rain, it was the hardest work we've ever done.
Well, on that note, you also tried the mechanical harvesting.
Yeah,
in
and
2018.
so 2019 we did. We had the baler, the Oracle baler. We brought in a Kloss baler for the 700 acres because we only had 2 weeks to harvest everything here. So a lot of that was taken for biomass. The other 60 acres we did more for biomass and flower, and that was hand harvested. The bales they're a monster task in themselves. You really need to make sure. My suggestion, if you're going for biomass, if there's a way that you can, basically harvest it and lay it in the field and then use a combine, that would be, I would think, your cheapest method of actually doing it for biomass. Hand harvest for biomass in the future is over. The price per the pound is just too low. It's a byproduct maybe for us if we're growing smokable flower. So it's easy just to take that and sell that as a separate byproduct for oil. We also did, believe it or not, silage baling in New York because we had invested in a stripper head from Shelburne where it would go and just strip the flower off of the plant, but our plants were too big, so it broke all the teeth in New York. So we had used a forager, a corn harvester to actually take down and took most of the plant. That lowers your CBD. We've used raised drying floors. We dried about 1 million pounds in New York. It was a crazy storm, to be honest with you. Please be careful, with the type of drying equipment you're going to use. Feel free to reach out to me and ask me. But I think if there's ways that you can do this economically without having to dry, if you can dry in the field, you're going to, especially for biomass, you're going to save yourself a lot of money. We typically, this 2020, we did a hand harvest, but it was all grown for smokable flower. So as you can see here, this is our warehouse on the left where we're hanging the plants. This is old style. We literally have scissor lips and we hang. This is all flower that's going to be hung dry. On the right, you'll also see another shot in our warehouse. A lot of people also use racking systems for hanging for smokable flower. This is us cutting the plants to get them ready to be brought into the warehouse. And then here's one of our greenhouse shots of also flower being, I think this was actually a seed, us drying for seed propagation. And I think this is one of our harvest towards our end of season, early October, late September, before we were going to harvest. Most of the plants you will see, there is a lot of phenos within the genetics still in hemp. You've got different sizes here. We were growing 5 different strains, but they were, segregated each of those strains. Some were flowering a little bit earlier than others, and we planted them on purpose so that we could stagger our harvest. I think the call of action for legislature, we mentioned earlier, what makes this a feasible crop? I think it's really important that we figure out this harvest window and we figure out the total THC and raise that limit. And then, this plant, as Phil said, it's so remarkable. I mean, it provides us food, it provides us medicine, it provides us fiber and plastic. And I mean, in 19, we donated a few tons of the stock to be made into homes, to hemp home and hemp insulation for some nonprofits here in Ojai. There's just so many uses, and we know that it sequesters so much carbon. Helping farmers to even subsidize and put, I think, hemp into their as cover crops or as a rotational crop.
Right.
It would just be an amazing thing we could help this, help the environment with. But I'm going to leave it there. If there's any questions, I think we went over.
Yeah, I think we covered our end. You want to let Sandor come on?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, please stop your share and then Sandor can start his share. And then I think we'll hold questions for after Sandor's presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions from ourselves and from the audience as well. So.
Okay, well, that's a tough act to follow, and that was a lot of information. So I'll take a moment here and digest all that. My name's Sandra Bogdan, and I own Bogdan Agricultural Systems. We are a boutique greenhouse producer. Right now, we're just working in the EU market. I mean, also opens us up to the US market, but there's so much, when I'm up against guys like Akasha and Phil, it's like there's a lot of competition out there. So on a boutique type small level, we felt that getting into Europe, would help with sales a little bit, which still remains to be seen because shipping to Europe is proving quite difficult. Just move this thing. So a little bit about us. We've been kind of scouring up and down the coast, south of San Francisco, San Mateo County. And we kind of ran into the cut flower industry, which was dwindling and dying as it was. And then COVID hit and there's no more funerals, there's no more weddings, there's no more cut flower industry whatsoever. So we've run into, quite a bit of greenhouse space that's just been fallow for the last 2 or 3 years. So, I'm kind of old fashioned, so you see a lot of smokable flower growers that want to grow in containers, and they try, especially in this boutique market, and they really are just as Gordon said before, they're really just growing the same way as inefficient ways, just like cannabis. I mean, their overhead is through the roof, they're trellising, it's just painful to watch. So we luckily enough found 6 acres of greenhouse that had soil floors, so no containers, which I was elated about that. you know, it gives us the ability to build the soil. I mean, we're definitely behind the ball, as I said, because we're thrown into cut flower greenhouses, which, yeah, I mean, they have not been doing a good job. You know, they've just been pumping flowers out, and there's really been no regard. And, you know, as I go into the chemical sheds of, you know, the fertilizer sheds of what they have, it's, whoa, I mean, there's skull and crossbone warnings on a lot of the products that they've used in the past. So, you know, it's offered us a decent opportunity to try and, you know, start moving some facilities in the right direction. I mean, the owners are kind of kicking their feet and screaming a little bit about it. Oh, I've been hearing about organic production for 20 years. And I said, well, you know, that's why you are where you are right now with empty greenhouses. So, you know, we're determined to turn this place organic in the next 3 years, whether you like it or not. And I'm pretty certain you're going to thank me, you know, by the end of it. A little bit about me. You know, I've kind of got thrown into cannabis at 19 years old, which was a long time ago, and kind of got thrown into a scale that was pretty uncomfortable at that time in the early 90s. So it was definitely a grow or die type of situation. I obtained a lot of information doing that, a lot of what's right and what's wrong. Moved into large scale cattle operations and large scale farming for 10 years of my life in Eastern Oregon. I was running 80,000 acre ranches, you know, pretty much by myself in my late 20s. So, you know, with the cannabis experience and this large scale agriculture experience, you know, I feel like, you know, I have a pretty good handle on trying to jump into the hemp market, because it is moving towards large scale, but at the same time, you still need to be able to make a decent smokable boutique product. And as I said earlier, you know, we're growing Cbg flower just to be able to get into the EU market. There are some difficulties in Cbg flower. It's not as new as the CBD strains that most other people are, or excuse me, it's newer than most of the CBD strains that most people are growing. So our genetics are a little bit behind. We find that, you know, when you see pounds of CBD flower, they're only yay big, and then you see pounds of CBG flower and they're twice the size. The flower is incredibly delicate, you know, and it just doesn't have the genetics underneath it. I mean, it takes a special grower to, you know, foresee these corn earworms and foresee all these problems. Because I mean, this summer with the CBG strain we did, it was just one problem after the other, and if you were not able to see it first and wait to react to like the problem, you were going to find yourself in a lot of trouble with it. You know, as these guys, as the guys before me have been saying, you know, soil remediation is a big deal, and we're finding that out as we go through with the cut flower greenhouses that we're in. It has cleaned the soil, and much like Phil and Natasha said, we had a couple ranges that we did some soil testing before we grew, and you know, I told the owner, I said, well, I don't know, you know, this is a roll of the dice. You know, I don't know if we're even going to pass test by the end of it. And we did pass test, and I have our soil test coming out right now. But I mean, I think that, you know, we're definitely on the right track of helping people and helping the soil get cleaner. Production costs is, you know, as everyone said, that's, you know, it's hand drying and harvesting, as you can see in the picture, and also like Phil and Natasha showed. I mean, hand harvesting it's almost a labor of love. I mean, it is what it is. It's very labor intensive. The whole 2 weeks thing that they've now thrown at also in San Mateo County, we also have the 2 weeks that's been implemented on us. I mean, you know, we're only doing 6 acres of greenhouse, which is about like 30,000 plants. So I couldn't imagine how, you know, on Phil and Natasha's level, how 2 weeks is even going to be even feasible for you guys to do that. I mean, that just sounds like, I mean, I barely made it through, I barely made it in a month on 6 acres, you know, because, and ideally we would like to harvest in sections of the plant too, if possible, you know, take the tops and then let the bottoms and the middles have a little bit more time. And, you know, it just kind of gives you a little more money in the end. You know, and as I said, drying is, you know, I've consulted for a lot of guys that have called me and said, we have 300 acres. And I said, that's nice. And they said, well, now what do we do? And You know, as those guys, as Phil and Akasha once said again, well, you're gonna have to build some hoop houses and throw some dehues in there, and good luck with that. I mean, your overhead's going to be through the roof. So, I mean, I would highly suggest that before you get into even contemplate getting into this, your drying facility is probably the most important thing that you have, to me. I mean, because there's nothing worse than be sitting there with 3 weeks to go, saying, where are we going to dry this? Calling your neighbors, asking for barns, asking for this. I mean, it's just not a position to. So I would suggest to start backwards and start with your drying facilities and work your way backwards, because growing the plant it's a pretty easy plant to grow. I mean, there are some issues with it, but it's a fairly easy plant to grow. Harvesting and curing is another, it's another labor intensive process. I mean, in the smokeable flower industry, as you can see with our picture there, every flower has to be snipped off the stalk. And that's before you trim. That is labor intensive. I mean, I couldn't imagine what, guys who are doing a couple 100 acres are going through to do that. Just on my 6 acre level, I still have people going and they're not getting done. I mean, it's, to get it all down off the stalk and get it in the boxes before you even get to the trimming process is labor intensive, very expensive, and it's a pretty slow and arduous process. Trimming is a whole nother issue that we are all coming up against. There's been a lot of people that have jumped from the cannabis industry to the hemp industry, and they have very unrealistic expectations of what we're able to do on the scale to get a product of what they're used to seeing of a small boutique cannabis grow, when we're talking acres and, tens of thousands or millions of pounds in some cases, and trying to get it trimmed to their exact expectations is proving a little bit difficult right now. I think that's one of the major, and especially in the smokeable flower industry. I mean, that's one of the major things, that there has to be some sort of give. I've used machine trim, and I've run it through the machine once, and there was a significant amount of loss, and then the buyers weren't satisfied with that. So then I would run it through the machine 2 or 3 more times, and then all of a sudden I had 60% loss in my flower crop, and I ended up with bags and bags and bags of biomass or cigarette material, or however you want to look at it. So if you're now taking the smokeable flower and gone into biomass, you've gone from a product that could be anywhere from $100 to $200 a pound down to something that's $5 a pound. So, as we got into this smokeable flower thing, my sons and I, our question was, who's really our end user? There's plenty of cannabis in California, but then we realized that, there's the hemp flower is a very nice happy medium in between cigarettes and cannabis. I mean, cigarettes obviously have the health issues that come along with it, and cannabis, like it or not, it's definitely kind of pretty rough on your brain to be smoking that many cannabis cigarettes a day. So hemp cigarettes seem to be a happy medium for people that are trying to wean off of cigarettes or not, and then it's a pretty social, is social smoking or even just normal smoking. I mean, I think it's the best of both worlds as far as that goes for hemp cigarettes. Future industry concerns. Well, as they said, the processing is not really there. The sales and having contracts with buyers is, that's a very important thing. There's many guys, and I'm sure, all the other farmers can attest to this. I mean, we've seen lots of people that they have a contract and they don't have a contract, and they're growing without a contract, and they're stuck with this barn of material at the end. Do they have enough money to process it all, or are they just going to let it hang? How long can you let it hang before it starts to decarboxylize? So there's a lot of things like that. I mean, I would tell most people, if you're going to try and get into this industry, don't overreach. Start small the first year. Try and find your buyers. Try and work with your buyers. Try and form a relationship with your buyers. Because as for right now, to just blast a couple acres of hemp and then be sitting there on the open market with it is, unless you're well financially funded, it's not a real great place to be. It'll all sell at some point, but you definitely have to be willing to sit there for a couple months with your product. FDA regulations can concerning food additives is one of the most pivotal points of the industry. I mean, if that comes through for us, it can go into drinks and shakes and smoothies and energy drinks and all these things. I mean, then we're going to really see consumer demand go through the roof. I don't know. I mean, maybe Akasha and Phil know. I'm not quite sure where we're at on that right now. I hear, that comes to the forefront and it seems like we're ready to do it. And then they pull back on us and then they're ready to do it. And then they pull back on us. So, to me, that's really the biggest driver in this industry right now is if, when we can go into foods. I think let's just open it up to questions at this point, you guys. I mean, after going after Gordon and Phil and Akasha, I feel like we've pretty much covered most of the bases on everything. So I think questions, Rex, if you're okay with that, would probably be the way to go now.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that, Sandor. And yeah, I think we'll open it up to questions. And I have several, and there's a bunch that Ann forwarded to me from the panel as well. And, the financing is kind of a big deal. And I think I would pose this question to all of you, and including Dr. Jones too, as are banks willing to finance these operations, and what kind of hoops do you have to jump through to get financing? Why don't we start with you, Sandor, because you were most recently speaking.
Well, what I've seen is they're starting to be, but the amount of I mean, they want you to put your farm up against it, or they want to have some big form of capital to give you the loan. So it's almost, from what I've gone with the little bit I've worked through hemp financing, is that you almost need to have the amount of money that you're asking for to be able to do it anyway. So you may as well just put up your own money and just do it. So, I mean, that's what I found so far. I mean, I don't know that I think the USDA is starting to come out with some loans here slowly, and that might be a little bit different than, what is offered right now. But I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I haven't really seen any type of financing that I've wanted to dive into.
Well, and you sent a kind of follow-on, is even using banks. I mean, will banks accept like hemp money? I know cannabis money is very debatable. Do banks question hemp growers about, like, okay, this is hemp money, like we have to be careful with this?
I found that a little bit. I feel like that's changing quickly. And, now that it's a USDA accredited crop, they don't really have much choice but to accept the hemp money. I definitely, in 2019, it was certainly more. In 2018, I'm sure. But as from what I've seen this year, it's, there's starting to be a lot. It's starting to open up a little bit.
Akasha, you had something to say.
Yeah, no, I'm going to agree with Sandor. I mean, 19, we were able to, Bank of the West was the first bank really to support us here in Southern California to do hemp financing. Before that, it was, before that, it was very difficult. If a company or bank found out that you were, doing operations with hemp, they would shut your bank account down. We haven't had an issue since we've been with Bank of the West. I know that some merchant banks now, for online sales and things, they're still, they require what you write, what claims you make, both from an FDA standpoint, but also just making sure that it's not related to cannabis or THC in any way, even for online, type of merchant processing too. But we haven't been able to get a loan, like Sandor said, that was something that we wanted to, basically you have to put your house up or your land or your property to match the loan. And it's like, okay, well, what happens if I've shown this much revenue last year? I think, in another year or so, if you've been doing operations for 2 or 3 years, most of the banks will begin to lighten those rules and maybe give some financing on interest-based financing.
Yeah, I'd like to bring Dr. Jones. Have you run across this problem with the farmers you work with?
I think I would just echo what the other folks have said, that this was more of a problem in 2019 in terms of just like, where do I actually like put this money, this income that you're making. And I think that there are certain banks in Oregon that play more nicely with hemp operations than others. And in terms of loans and financing, I'm not aware of much. My sense is that most of the growers who are growing are not taking out, are not financing sort of capital to do that. I know I've been asked questions of like, can you help me come up with the budget to give to my investors and like predict revenue? And it's like, well, like what month of the year do you want me to predict revenue on? What crop are you going to grow? How much of it? And that I think if I were in the position of a bank, I might be, with how dynamic the regulations are and the markets, I would probably be leery to easily give loan out a bunch of money because things could change quickly and be left holding the ball.
Right, and there was a comment from one of the participants about the USDA has now a $10 million program to help with the hemp production chain. And we posted that, I think Ann posted a website that can be accessed for that, which is, I don't know if that's open to farmers or to like institutions that are helping farmers, but any and all help is probably needed and necessary to get this market off the ground. I'm kind of wondering, you know, Farm Service Agency does loans, and they're kind of the lender of last resort if you've been refused by 2 or 3 commercial banks. Has anybody had any experience with going to FSA, the Farm Service Agency, for a loan? Nobody's.
I've talked with our local office, and I don't, last I spoke with them, they didn't have like actual federal rules of how do we deal with hemp growers. It is federally legal, but just in terms of like an operating procedure, they didn't have
Right.
that. So they were talking with growers, but not engaging with them in their programs.
Right. I'm guessing they'd be pretty shy about doing any of that, especially with a volatile market such as it is, because these are federally guaranteed loans. Akasha, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I would. There is, you know, with COVID, there is obviously with the PPP, hemp was allowed to be under that for grant for PPP, and also you can get an SBA loan with the EIDL. So that was accepted, you know, in the last 6 months with this whole COVID epidemic and pandemic. So that is available to hemp farmers, and we've had, you know, we did have success with PPP last year. So, and I think they're doing a second round. So that is something you can use to help. Obviously, it goes towards payroll, and that's great because it covers your employees. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I have some other questions that kind of I wrote down as we were going along. And clearly, it's a young market. There's all kinds of information needed. What would you all consider the biggest obstacle or obstacles to growing hemp as a profitable crop? So like, what are the biggest challenges in your neighborhood? And why don't we start with Akasha, and then we can go to Sandor and Dr. Jones.
yeah, thank you, Rex. I think Sandor really hit, you know, he hit the nail. And it's the regulations, and both from an FDA standpoint, you know, with allowing basically, and we were told in 18 and early 19 that, you know, the FDA would get behind, you know, allowing him to either be suggested dosage or a nutraceutical. And without that, the big brands are unwilling to jump in. So you've got basically a very low demand with an oversupply of product that happened in 19, and that's still being processed out even to this day, even though people grew again in 2020. And then you have, you know, the other hurdle. I think that would open up the market for customers, and, you know, and being able to get contract grows. And, you know, then you've got also just the regulatory side of it, where you've got like the state of California now with this new AB 245 bill that I think it's what it's called. You know, they're thinking of banning smokable hemp flower, and that's really the only, you know, viable source of income right now for hemp flower, you know, in this industry. So if they ban that, you're pretty much going to destroy whatever still is happening here in California if you take out the hemp smokable flower market. And I think, you know, Sandor was really, it was the way he described, you know, I think the desire for this flower and versus, you know, smoking cannabis or smoking cigarettes or nicotine, I mean, it does fit a non-addictive kind of social accepted, healthy way of relaxing. I mean, yes, there are going to be some negatives that come from smoking anything, but I think, from by and large, the negative qualities of it are very
It's
low.
not tobacco, it's not marijuana. Yeah.
Right, and you're gonna be able to remember your name after you smoke it. But I think the question, I think there's a lobby group that's trying to push down the hemp smokable flower, so that regulatory side of it, and also the USDA with the THC limit of 0.3 and the total harvest time of 15 days. I mean, it's just these aren't things you put on other ag crops. It's already hard enough to farm as it is. So opening up those two, FDA and the USDA, coming up with more risk averse, and then I think the contracts would open up and allow sales to happen, because without a contract going forward, I mean, Sandor said it, I would not jump in this game. When we jumped in it, we were first osmosis, we were able to survive and get through 19, but I tell you, it's been brutal. And I know so many friends and other farmers that have really had difficult times, including ourselves. So, get the contract, but without certainty from regulation standpoint, I mean, who's going to jump in this, even for the consumer brands?
Well,
Good
on this
points.
same note, I just wanted to bring up, this isn't something that all of a sudden is a brand new crop. Our biggest competitors are Canada and China. And like everything we grow in Ventura County, our biggest competitors are South America or Mexico. So just dealing with international competition,
Yeah, we're going to lose that. We're going to lose the traction that we have. You've got, countries like Thailand just raising their limit to 1% for hemp and making the whole in cannabis legal. I mean, Europe's raising their limit to 0.3. It's with the EU. So, and you've got Switzerland at 1%. I mean, it's just, we've got to have clear competitive advantages in America to be competitive. And it's got to start on a federal level. And then it's got to be basically implemented on a state level for us to be competitive and successful. I mean, right now, Oregon has Gordon, you will have a competitive advantage over California. And it's very smart of Oregon to allow, to keep the 30-day harvest window and to test, I believe, only on Delta 9 now, not on total THC, if I'm correct. You could tell me if I'm wrong or not, but
this past season, 2020, we switched to total THC, but certainly did have an advantage the year prior when we were just looking at Delta 9.
Yeah. And you have a 30-day harvest window still?
28 days, something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, make it easy, make this easier on farmers. Don't make this harder, and, have clarity within the state.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna leave it to Sandor now.
Yeah, Sandor, what do you have to add?
I mean, as they said, if we're talking about international competition, I mean, it's just the same as, Phil was saying with any agricultural crop. I mean, we have to pay $15 an hour for labor while everybody else is paying $2 or $3 an hour. So, I mean, we just get, every agricultural crop is in California is pretty much, that's the way it is right now. So, I mean, even if you look at the tomato market, I mean, heirloom tomatoes, organic heirloom tomatoes go for $6 a pound at the store, but we couldn't afford to grow them here because they can grow them in Mexico for $1 an hour labor. So, that's kind of where, we're moving quickly towards that. And on a large scale, the Ukraine's opening up, and a lot of Eastern European countries are now opening up to it. So I mean, that's only going to put more and more pressure on us. So we are definitely at a crossroads here where they opened up this great new industry for us, and now they're putting the clamps on us. And it's kind of, you almost just have to kind of sit here and just pay attention to what happens and kind of go with it as it happens. Because I mean, it sounds as far as like a clear goes.
Yeah.
Rex.
Well, it sounds like, just to paraphrase what I've heard from you guys, it's consistent regulatory mechanisms across states as well, at a national level would be very helpful, and not to make things harder for farmers. I mean, farming is hard enough as it is. So I have a question about Do you feel there's enough processing facilities for the products you're producing, or do you process your own, or what's the situation about processing? And why don't we start with you, Sandra?
Oh, I can speak for Akasha. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I process my own right now. You know, there aren't, I mean, somebody could probably make a fortune if they were to open up a smokable hemp flower processing facility that we actually all trusted and thought that we were going to get a good majority of our product back. Because I mean, right now, I mean, I have horror stories of sending it out, and I waited on the way out and I waited on the way back in, and oh, there's only 22% of my flower here. Where the rest of, oh, well, you know, it's a lot of loss. And so, you know, there's a lot. That's not, I can't speak for everybody, but you know, I'm not sending my flower out. I'm definitely going to do it myself. You know, I know Akasha and Phil, I mean, as far as I know, you guys started your own lab, no? I mean, that's kind of something that, you know, even that, I mean, it's a long process to ship your material out and hope for a tolling rate that's going to be good for you. And then, you know, unless you're going to literally have somebody go every step of the way with your material and make sure that, you know, everything's on the up and up, you're definitely leaving a lot to chance, which, you know, with our margins, we can't leave things to chance.
No, we're in the same boat, Sam.
Yeah.
I mean, we had some stuff processed. We got locked into some contracts. We lost our tail with these contracts, and you know, we sent the first 30,000 pounds to be, you know, to be made into distillate. We found a little bit of metal in there, you know, from the original acre too, that we didn't know about. So then we took it to isolate. Contract was read that we had to give a certain amount per, you know, a payout to the processor, a certain amount per kilo, and the price had dropped so much that by the time we just asked for our product back, we got like 20% back. But you know, we took all the risk and spent all the money, and the processor kept the rest. So yeah, we've had some ugly, you know, experiences with that. We did end up trying to create our own. We kind of partnered with a friend of mine here who's done extraction before, so we've done a small level of extraction for our own distillate. And we know it's clean. I mean, we also grow organically, so it's certified organic. Trying to find an organic certified processor too is difficult. And like you said, Sandor, knowing that even on a smokable flower level, I mean, how do you know you're going to get, like you said, what you gave and get it back? So we've ended up having to pretty much do everything in house, and it's pretty costly to do that, but you know, that's the way you can survive.
Yeah, I'd like to get Dr. Jones' response too, if you have something to add.
No, I think we're talking about the right things. To my mind, well, maybe in 2019, I think in Southern Oregon, we ran into drying issues, as Sandor was saying, that when it's a big project to do. And my sense is that the processors will come along when there's really a market. There are processors, they will they will toll you a bunch, and they will process your material, and they'll hand it back to you. And you say, good luck selling this. And that I think that we'll end up in a circumstance where when there are markets and there really is like an obvious like sort of flow through from the field to the processor to the outlet, that the processors will step in and scale up and fill that space. The processors who I've interacted with closely are feeling like, oh, maybe we probably spent too much on equipment, that we thought this was going to be huge and everyone was going to come from every direction to have us process their material. But if there's not a market, you don't take it out of the barn, you leave the material there.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, Anne forwarded a question, go-to source of information. You know, there's so many information gaps, or just not, some of the information is non-existent, but as farmers and as an extension agent, where do you guys go for information? Why don't we start with Dr. Jones? Why don't you, where do you go for information?
Where do I go for information? It's some like funny blending of talking with growers who have, I think in many cases, are doing something that works for them. Is it like the best thing to do? Not always sure, but they've got practices that they've been able to make work. And so that's one place. And then in my like sort of extension world, I'm going to like sort of basic principles. We know lots about how plants use water and require nutrients. We know lots about weed control practices. And there's ends up being a gap of how exactly does this apply to hemp. But I'm going to start with those first principles. I'm going to ask growers what they're doing and then say, like, we're not going to get a better answer than that. I can tell you about what I know. You should keep doing what you're doing unless this sounds right. It's going to be a decade before I can give you precise fertilizer requirements for your crop in the way I can for basically any other crop.
Right. Sandor, where do you go?
It takes a village to do this. I mean, it really does. I mean, like I said, I was involved in cannabis in '93. I still find myself calling, people that I knew 30 years ago and say, hey, I'm up against this, and hey, I'm up against that. And, and then I talked to my, we have a local fertilizer dealer who begrudgingly works with organic products because the area is, demanding it now. I mean, his initial thing is, oh, you just nuke it with this. And I said, okay, well, we're past that now. Let's get on to, what do we do from here? No, I mean, it's just the kind of a old fashioned talk over the fence to your neighbor type of situation, honestly, at this point. And, I got my problems and I mean, corn earworms, I mean, I had them 15 years ago. I didn't even know what they were until the very end of the crop. And then all of a sudden, all my flowers started rotting out from the inside. And, we went from, oh, this is going to be a great winter to, well, the kids aren't getting new basketball shoes real quick. So, it's just, it's kind of a trial and error type of thing. There's some good consultants out there that, you could work with. But, it's just basically, talking with guys that have been in the industry for a long time, and, you just have to be open with information. I mean, I'm not, I deal with some people that don't want to talk about things, and I don't deal with them anymore because, I mean, I'm always more than open to have any discussion about, what needs to be done or what I think you could do, or, I mean, it's just like, you just have to be open. I mean, we're kind of a group at this point, and I mean, that's just how I see it.
Yeah. Well, Akasha, you've been in this probably longer than anybody. Where do you go for information?
I mean, I think Sandor really put that on the heel. I mean, we've got our guys that work in the cannabis industry here in Carpinteria. So it's like when we're in the nursery, they've been growing cannabis there for 4, 5, 6 years. And yeah, are they using napalm and nuking everything, or are they doing it organically? We're growing in the soil also. A lot of the things that Sandor had initially it was all flower nurseries originally 3, 4 years ago when we took them over. So we see a lot of issues in there, and we've used biologics and beneficials, and it's trial and error. And it is just literally talking to others that are in this industry. Ideally people that are closer to you, that have similar issues that are, at least from a pest control. That's been our biggest.
Yeah, we have a pretty tight community in Ventura County, and we know all the farmers, and we network as much as we can. For what it's worth, I don't know if anybody speaks Chinese, but they've been growing it for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And I've heard they do have a lot of research on hemp production. And the other good news is that's why Rodell is here. They really are going to start doing more research, more trials, more testing. It may be kind of a shot in the dark or just working with neighbors at this point, but I think the research is going to come real fast.
Yeah, there's a consultant you work with here. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a guy I brought, a friend of mine, George, and he was a lifesaver a few times. But when you get the spider mites, and Sandra's probably had that too. It's like, oh my God, like this is insane. I mean, yeah, you're going to cut the tops. Are you going to spray it with, what are you going to spray on the top to keep it from infecting? Are you going to keeping your implements and whatever your tools you're using clean and sterilized? And how do you put people in a hazmat suit to go between one house and the next house? I mean, that's kind of what it's the practices you put in place, I think, will help prevent also.
Well, it's all preventative maintenance. I mean, it's all preventative maintenance. So you got to start clean. You got to, I mean, that's the biggest thing, especially in the greenhouse environment. As much as I hate to pay the labor to clean the walls and, and get myself ready to go, which, that's what we're doing right now. I mean, it's expensive, but, so is russet mites and, so are root aphids. I mean, there's so many things that can just dry. I mean, I've seen people with russet mites and root aphids that, have been on a small scale that have repainted everything and just cleaned the whole greenhouse, and they replanted again. And now we have more russet mites. So, it's like they say, I would agree, starting, just doing your best to stay clean as you can right from the start is imperative.
Well, so that brings up an interesting question, because I've been working in, my background's in IPM and a little bit more in soils, but in IPM, and both of you folks are organic. And so there's a very, especially more recently, there's a real big push to not just be passive organic, meaning like, oh, we won't spray any, chemical fertilizers or use any chemical fertilizers or synthetic pesticides. The trend is to become more proactive in creating beneficial habitat. And it seems like, and some of the pictures I've seen from Gordon and all your pictures, I didn't see any kind of beneficial habitat out there. Like what, and I think that it's not a miracle cure, but especially in organics, you need to get some beneficial habitat out there. Otherwise, who's controlling your pests? You got to come in and nuke them with even organic pesticides. They're expensive. Why not experiment around with like putting in a row of, I'm sure, Phil, I've been to your farm, I think you have hedgerows on the edges, but maybe you need to start putting hedgerows more down the middle, or, just give the beneficials a chance to do the work, because they evolved doing this kind of stuff as well. We have to come in with artificial means.
Very true. Actually, I have done a little bit more, mainly in strawberries, creating islands right in the middle of the field.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I think I think there should be, one of the areas of research might be a little bit more information on, as Sandor mentioned, it's all prevention, right? Not only about pests, but in your soil, if your soils, and most of the soils we're working with across the country, they're degraded soils. We've been tilling them and masking kind of poor soil function for decades now. If your soil's in good shape, I talk to growers all the time. Your best pest management strategy is getting your soils up to snuff. And if your soils are in poor shape, your plants are going to be stressed, and you're going to invite in thrips and mites and all these other critters. So I have a few more questions, and then we'll get to the CDFA and the crop insurance information. But I'm kind of wondering, so FDA has not come in a strong way about livestock feed, and I think this might be a market because you can grow this stuff. I'm really impressed with, it takes a 0.3 acre feet down in Ventura County to get a crop off the ground. That's incredible, because here in California, we're going through the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Groundwater withdrawals are going to be restricted in the future. And so this is a very water conserving crop. Where is the regulation on livestock feed? And Dr. Jones, maybe we start with you. You may be more acquainted with that.
And I won't be able to get the acronyms right, but there's like a state an organization of state animal feed control officers that have a list of like acceptable feed additives, and hemp byproducts do not currently appear on that list. And so then I think it's up to the state's departments of agriculture to then make some determination. I think USDA has said, like, no, we're not, don't have enough information about, is this spent hemp biomass that's been extracted? Is this hemp plants out of the field? How much cannabinoid is in those in that material that's being fed, and what happens to it in the animal? I think there is some evidence that feed cannabinoid laden hemp material to a dairy cow, you will find those cannabinoids in the milk. And understanding those relationships and the consequences thereof is the link. We want to do that before everyone starts feeding out hemp, but likely valuable in as a feed by itself or in mixed rations. I know Oregon State and Kansas State are doing those trials on trying to figure out how the fate of the cannabinoids.
Right. And we have folks from Kansas on this call, actually. Akasha, have you looked into the livestock feed market? Oh, you're muted, Akasha.
Sorry about that. We keep trying to do it back and forth with the muting. We had actually someone asked me last week who's got a large ranch and was wondering if we could use biomass for feed. And to be honest with you, I have no idea, because we have a lot of biomass left over from last year. The seed market, for food, that's something maybe Gordon would know more about. I don't know anybody that's requested. It would make sense that it would be something that would be, for dairy farms and cattle ranches, I would think, and even horse. The one thing we did offer was the stock fiber. We did donate some to some equestrian horse ranches that wanted to basically try it on for the ground cover, in the stalls.
Oh, huh. Interesting. Sandor, have you looked at that market?
Yeah, actually, Gordon, I believe Oregon State was doing it on feeder cattle, if I remember correctly. I think that they had my oldest was going there at the time, and I believe that they told me that they were doing it on feeder cattle. I know right now that they're doing the compressed pellets for horse feed, for the older horse with some inflammation issues, and so it's actually going for a pretty high penny. I noticed it at the feed store the other day. It was not cheap. So I think horses is going to be where they're going to go with it first, and if the horses don't die, which we all know they won't, after a couple of years of a year or two of the horses not dying, they might look into it more. Which is also just another holdback of the FDA, because I mean, if the CBD or whatever goes through into the meat, I mean, it's just a whole nother market that they would be having really quickly. So it all just goes, honestly, as we discussed earlier, it all just goes back to these FDA food regulations, and when they the information gets out there, things will change.
Great.
Is it biomass, Sandor, that they're doing the pellets with? They're taking a high CBD biomass and then just pelletizing it in the mill?
Just compressing and pelletizing it, yeah. And I mean, I think a 40-pound bag was like $30-something. I mean, it was I was pretty blown away by the price on it.
Yeah. Well, especially in a state like California, we're #1 dairy state in the union. So there's a lot of potential feed that could be going to dairy cattle, for example. And I know out in Kansas, there's a lot of feedlots out there, and that could be a potential crop, and a water saving crop too, because the Ogallala is not doing that well out in the Midwest. It's being drained as we speak, and not much recharge happening. So, okay.
Does anybody know the water consumption rate of alfalfa in comparison to hemp? I mean, obviously we know that hemp, we don't have a water consumption rate, but I mean, I think alfalfa is a little bit more water loving.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure what it is, but certainly alfalfa uses more water. Well, it depends on the year too, to get some good rains. I do not know what the average is.
I would guess my brother-in-law grows, organic alfalfa. He's got a farm west of Woodland, and that's flood irrigated, right? So I'm guessing a minimum 2 acre-feet a year. And, he gets about 8 to, depending on the year, maybe 8 to 12 cuttings off of that, So there's, it produces more biomass for sure, but it certainly sucks up a lot more water. That's for sure. So, all right. Well, I'm going to go back to my presentation, and we're going to move on to the next section. And let me introduce the speakers in this section. Like to introduce Loc Phan, is an environmental scientist at the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And she's been with the Industrial Hemp Program since 2019. She provides support to the county agricultural commissioners and growers regarding the cultivation and industrial hemp in accordance with the Division 24 of California Food and Agricultural Code. And I'm sure she can enlighten us as to what that Division 24 is. And then also I want to introduce a colleague of mine and friend, Jeff Shazinski. He's been working with NCAT for quite a long time. He's got expertise in organic and sustainable agriculture, public policy, marketing, and economics, GMOs, genetically modified crops, and organic horticulture, and renewable energy. So he's got a broad background. He has worked on regional sustainable ag projects. He's taught at several different institutions of higher education up in Montana. He started one of the first CSA, the community supported ag farms in New Jersey back in the day. I think that was last century, Jeff. And then served in the Peace Corps in Belize in Central America, and worked on his grandfather's dairy farm in Wisconsin. He holds master's degrees in a couple areas, ag, economics, and political science as well. So Loc, why don't we go to your presentation? Oh, I need to stop share, sorry.
Hello, everyone, and my apologies. I don't have a webcam for my computer, but hello, everyone. Once more, my name is Loc Phan. I'm an environmental scientist with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, specifically for the Industrial Hemp Program. So I really want to thank NCAT as well as Eco Farms for giving me this opportunity to present to everyone today. I will be providing a general overview of the program. So I wanted to start off this presentation with a history of our federal legislation, regulations, as well as our state legislation. So Division 24 of the California Food and Agriculture Code, also known as California's Hemp Law, was established by the California Industrial Hemp Farming Act, or also known as Senate Bill 566 in 2013. But it was inoperative due to a provision in the law. Now, it did not actually come into effect until Prop 64, which we all know as Adult Use of Marijuana Act, which passed in 2017. And so with that, it removed that provision, and therefore our Division 24 became operative. So I won't really go into very much detail about the whole history. I really want to concentrate really on the recent changes starting from 2018. So there were both federal and state legislation in 2018. We, as everyone was speaking of, we had the 2018 Farm Bill, which removed hemp from the Controlled Substance Act. And it also authorized states and tribes to regulate hemp cultivation based off of a regulatory plan approved by USDA. And we also we had Senate Bill 1409 on the state side, which passed in California, which made changes to clarify enforcement and further implement our program. And recently in 2019, we had the passage of Senate Bill 153 in California, which add additional changes to mirror the federal requirements. So really to have us to comply with the 2018 Farm Bill requirements for a state regulatory plan. And then of course, right after Senate Bill 153 was signed off by the governor, USDA established their interim final rules in October of 2019 as well. This is federal regulations and not legislation. But what the rules did is just provided more details on the requirements for the state and tribal regulatory plans. So what is Division 24 and what's in it? So this is a summary of the requirements found in Division 24 as we previously provided, as I previously provided in the previous slide. Division 24, the California Food and Agricultural Code, is the California Industrial Hemp Law. So in this summary, we have a few things. We have the requirement of having an advisory board to provide recommendations related to Division 24 to the Secretary. The Industrial Hemp Advisory Board is required to meet at least once a year, but hemp is a growing industry, and so because of that, they have been meeting very frequent. All of our board information, it is on our website, so you can actually watch all of those board meetings if you wanted, because they are recorded. We also have all of the attachments and meeting minutes that have been approved so far as well. And then, of course, we have the requirements that anyone who grows industrial hemp would need to register with the local county agricultural commissioner in order to cultivate in the state. And then there's also planting restrictions, like the use of approved cultivars, a planting size requirement, testing for THC concentration, and then the destruction of any industrial hemp that tests above that 0.3% THC concentration. Now, currently, in our law, there is an exemption for established agricultural research institutions from various requirements. Now, the definition of, it's really important, is that the definition of established agricultural research institution that is currently in effect at this time includes institution of higher education and anyone who maintains land or facilities for ag research. However, the law also includes a more limited definition that will become operative once the state has an approved regulatory plan by USDA. So here on this slide is the Title III of our California Code of Regulations and what is currently in effect. And so the California Code of Regulations can be found on Westlaw. If not, we also have a copy of our laws and regulations, all of our current laws and regulations on our industrial hemp webpage. And so I want to go ahead and quickly go through these sections. So Section 4900 is regarding our registration fee, which is currently $900 per registration. And if you're growing in multiple counties, it would be, since it's registration at different counties, it would be $900 every time you register for different counties as well. The Section 4901 and 4902, which is the requirements for registration applications, as well as the criminal history report. And that is the background checks that many people speak of. Section 4920, 4921 is regards to the list of approved cultivars, which growers would need and utilize. In addition to that list, it also speaks about the methodology and procedures to amend that list as well. And then finally, we have 4940, 4946 through 4946, 4950, 4950.1, which is in regards to sampling and testing for THC content. Now, it's really important to note that the last code sections about sampling and testing, we actually have gone through the regular rulemaking for those regulations. And right now, those rulemaking documents are at the Office of Administrative Law for their review and approval. And we anticipate we anticipate and we hope to hear back from OAL soon in regards to their determination on those regulations. But our presentation today is just really speaking out about what is currently in effect. So what industrial hemp is defined in our California Food and Agriculture Code in sections 81,000 A6. And it's just really important to note that in this definition, it includes the THC limit threshold to be 0.3% for Delta-9 THC. So our program requirements are structured based off of this limit. So we structure everything to ensure that hemp crop that's grown does not exceed this limit. And I do want to note that the federal definition also contains this limit of 0.3%. So the whole registration process is pretty simple. So if someone was interested in growing hemp, they would just need to get the application online from our website. They will fill it out and then submit it to their local county agricultural commissioner, along with the $900 registration fee. The commissioner will then review the application, and they are actually the ones who are issuing the proof of registration once all of the requirements are met. So in our law, we have 3 types of registration: a grower registration, breeder, and established agricultural research institution. However, the registration for research institutions won't take into effect until we have a state regulatory plan approved by USDA. So part of the registration requirements in the application, the applicant will provide their contact information, cultivation site information, and also a list of varieties that they plan to use. In addition to that, they would need to also submit a criminal history report for all of their key participants, a boundary map of the cultivation site that they listed, and of course the registration fee of $900. It's really important to note that there are a few unique requirements for each of these registrations. So with the growers, they need to provide documentations to show that they are using approved varieties. So we're referring to now is section 4920 for the list of approved cultivars. Breeders will submit a variety development plan. And then for research institution, they'll submit a research plan. So as of early last week, we have about a little bit over 500 registered growers and breeders in California in 34 different counties. There's a total of about 16,400 acres registered for hemp cultivation. If you look at the map on the right, the counties highlighted in yellow are those that currently have registrants. We have a registration summary on our webpage that we try to update monthly. So we do provide that information if you're interested to see where hemp is being grown on a monthly basis. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't have planted acres to report, but once our proposed regulations do come in effect, we should have that kind of information. So this next slide here kind of provides a general overview of the sampling and testing process prior to harvest. So registered growers will need to provide a pre-harvest report to the commissioner at least 30 days out from when they plan to begin harvest. The commissioner or a third-party sampler designated by the commissioner is responsible for collecting those samples at least 10 days before the anticipated harvest. Now, once collected, that sample would be delivered within 24 hours of collection, and the laboratories have 10 days to prepare and test the sample. At this time, those laboratories must be an ISO IEC 17025 accredited laboratories for THC analysis. These requirements, so based off of those results from those test reports, the grower can either harvest, resample, or destroy the crop. Now, at this time, the requirement and the process that I'm speaking of is based off of our emergency regulations that are in effect. As previously discussed in our regulation side, we did submitted rulemaking documents to the Office of Administrative Law, and so this process will be subjected to change once those regulations are in effect. So after a grower has received their test report, few things can happen. So if the test report passed, so it had a result that was no more than 0.3%, the grower can harvest up to 30 days from the sampling collection date. So they can harvest once they have that test report, and then they can harvest until 30 days from that sampling collection date. Now, if the test results show that the crop was found to be greater than 0.3% THC, but no more than 1%, then the grower has an opportunity to resample and retest. If the second test report passes, then of course the grower can harvest up to 30 days from the resampling collection date. If the second test report, though, does not show a passing THC level, where it is once more greater than 0.3%, but no more than 1%, then they will need to complete harvest within 45 days from the receipt of the lab test report. Now, if a lab test report indicates a THC content that is above the 1%, then the grower has no option. They will need to destroy. And that destruction needs to start within 48 hours and completed within 7 days from the receipt of lab report. So the first three sections that you see is referring to when a grower receives a test report. Now, the other two sections is destructions for other reasons. So the first reason is for non-compliant. So the cultivation of that crop was not in compliance with Division 24 of the Food and Agriculture Code or Title 3 of the Code of California Code of Regulations. With that, the grower will receive an abatement notice, and they will then be required to destroy 45 days from that receipt of the abatement notice. And that abatement notice would be coming from their county agricultural commissioner. And then, of course, we do understand that growers may also choose to voluntarily destroy their crop, due to a variety of reasons. Maybe they had a bad crop yield, the crop was infested, or they were with pests and diseases, or maybe they were just roguing out male plants. Then in this case, the grower then will have no time frame requirements, but it would be based off of the destruction plan that they will be providing. So I will let you know that all these destruction requires that the cultivator, the grower, to submit a destruction plan at least 24 hours prior to the start of the destruction for the county to then review and approve. So the destruction plan has to be reviewed by the county and have it approved before that destruction can begin. So at the beginning of our presentation, we did speak about the federal requirements and about the state regulatory plan approved by USDA. So what is our CDFA status on this? We have submitted a state plan to USDA for review. We will inform the public once our plan has been approved, and I will let you know how you can receive that notification at the end of our presentation. Since based off of USDA's webpage for their hemp production website, since California does not have an approved plan, growers are not required to follow the requirements outlined in federal interim final rules because we have submitted a plan, but they can still apply for the USDA hemp production license if they wish. But regardless of any federal requirements, all hemp growers in California must comply with existing state laws and regulations as well as any local restrictions that may apply. And then on this slide here, we wanted to kind of give everyone some regulatory consideration for hemp that is within CDFA. So of course, everybody was speaking about previously, new pests and diseases found in hemp and cannabis. It's really unknown as to what hemp and cannabis can be a host of. As Gordon was speaking of, and as well as the other farmers, we had the European corn borer as well as cannabis aphid being found here in California. If you were a hemp grower and you're planning to sell hemp nursery stock or hemp seeds, a license to sell nursery stock or the authorization to sell seed is required as well. We also have the licensing to handle, manufacture, process, and sell of hemp farm products for the purpose of resale or processing, and that goes through our CDFA's market enforcement branch. And then, of course, organic certification through our organics program here, and then the sales of hemp and hemp products at Certified Farmers Market, which we also have a Certified Farmers Market program here in CDFA. And so we do provide many information on our webpage. On our webpage, you can actually find our current laws and regulations, an extensive frequently asked questions that encompasses not just cultivation of industrial hemp, but also any kind of questions about importing and exporting hemp, as well as manufacturing and processing hemp as well. All of our applications and forms are found on our website as well, our board meeting information. And then here I really want to point out is the sign up to receive updates. So on there, you can subscribe to our public listserv. This is how we notify the public of any changes and updates to our program. So when our state plan gets approved, when we have public comment period or adoptions of any emergency or regular rulemaking and such, all of that is through that public listserv, and I highly encourage everyone to sign up on it if you're, really wanting to know what's going on with our program. And on our website as well, we actually posted our proposed state regulatory plan for the public to review. I do want to note that it does specify that look at those footers in our plan because it does include proposed language for certain regulations, and those are not in effect. It's something, it's what we're anticipating to propose, but it may still be subjected to changes. And then, of course, since registration is with the County Agriculture Commissioner, we have a link on our webpage as well as to the contact information for each county, including their website links as well, and that's the web address there. And then if you have any questions for our program or any general questions about our laws and regulations, you can feel free to email us at industrialhemp@cdfa.ca.gov. Or you can also call us at 916-654-0435. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll leave it the slide here just so that if you wanted to jot down our contact information.
Thank you, Locke. And actually, Jeff had a stream of questions, but one of them I think is primary is that what defines destruction of the crop? I mean, can you use it as a cover crop to plow down in case the THC level is above 0.3%?
So, okay, so destruction is required in our law. It specifies that, and if we're with the USDA and how they are promulgating their regulations at this time, they do provide suggestions as to what that destruction can be. And if our proposed regulations do come in effect, it does require us to meet those requirements. And I'm not sure if a cover crop is one of those options, Rex. I would have to double check.
Well, I mean, I use the word cover crop, but it's, do they have to burn it? Do they have to harvest it and burn it? Or can they just plow it down into the soil?
Yeah, that is an option. So it is
Okay.
an option that they can till it in.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's a basic question. Okay, very good.
Yeah, but once again, our plan, but the plan is approved by the commissioner. So I'm not quite sure if, if they have any kind of local restrictions as to what kind of methodology that can be used, but it would have to be, from my understanding, tilling could be an option.
Right, okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I think, Jeff, we'll turn the program over to you. And I would note that, so Locke, if you could stop your share and then Jeff can get his screen on. One of the things of a young volatile market like this is risk, and it's a huge, growers are taking on a huge risk, as Akasha and Sandor pointed out, and Phil too. And crop insurance is one way to kind of mitigate this risk. And so Jeff will be talking about that. And so Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Am I unmuted? Better check. Am I unmuted?
We can hear you. It's good.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name is Jeff Shazinski. I'm an agricultural and natural resource economist, as Rex said, and I've done many, many things over my long life. And I've also spent part of almost 16 years studying crop insurance, and specifically in crop insurance in the organic sector, which one might think one was crazy for doing such a thing. And sometimes I think that myself. My outline is I'm just going to give some basics on insuring hemp. And what is surprising to me is that not many people realize this is even possible. I'll be talking mostly about federally subsidized crop insurance programs. It's important to note that most crop insurance is federally subsidized that people use, meaning that taxpayers pay for a substantial amount of the premium cost. And so it's a lower cost program for folks. And because it is subsidized, there's a relationship between the private and public sector. They're private companies, they're called accredited insurance providers, who provide the programs, the subsidized programs, but there are also private ones. So I'm going to talk about the two that are available for hemp. One's called Actual Production History, or APH. The other one is Whole Farm Revenue Protection, which is a very, very different way of insuring crops. And then there is a private product, but I learned since getting back into this a bit, that this is probably not available this year, although it was last year, and I'm not quite sure how well it was used. And it's a very interesting approach, but I'm not going to cover that here because it's a very different, again, it's totally private, and was available and is kind of available, but not too readily available. So I'm not going to go there. And some basic things about getting a quote, and then some take homes. Jargon, crop insurance is a jargon-ridden field, and I hope I'm not using too many of those jargonistic words. But one thing that is important is distinguish revenue risk and yield risk. Revenue risk includes both the risks that are associated with yield and price, and yield is the one that we most think of. You know, a drought causes your crop to, then you get some repayment for that loss, and that's usually related to, is affected by yield, and that's that kind of risk. But revenue increases. Revenue is essentially price times yield. That's your revenue, and there are, of course, when a farmer plants and when he harvests, the price can change, and there's risks, therefore, in the price volatility of the crop you grow. And this might be important for hemp. And the issue there is that there aren't as many, and there isn't, for hemp in particular, a revenue-based product. Now, corn, soybeans, cotton, they all have revenue policies which assure from risks that are both yield and price related, and Whole Farm does too, which we'll get into later. Risk Management Agency is the USDA agency that fundamentally develops all the rules and really, in a sense, controls all federally subsidized crop insurance programs. And accredited insurance providers, as I said, there are only 14 of them. They're the private countries who, in a relationship with the federal government, service the policies, run the policies, and actually share in some of the benefits and risks of crop insurance. Beginning last year, APH, actual production or yield risk hemp policies were available in the United States, but in only certain counties in the United States, in every state. The unit of analysis in crop insurance is the county. You can have a certain policy in one county in a state, and it won't be available in the next county in the state. So it's very hard for one to say, is something covered, unless you actually look down to the county level. And that's doable by the website, but it's not a simple thing to do. And as we will find with hemp in California, there's only certain counties where it's available. And when this was made available for yield risk in certain counties in the United States, it had some certain restrictions that aren't necessarily true of all APH or yield history programs that for other crops. Again, applying with the regulations, which we just have heard about, have at least 1 year history of producing the crop. That might be, so it's not immediately available for a beginning hemp grower. Planted in a field. So I'm assuming that might then affect greenhouse production. Be a variety adaptable in the area, be grown under a contract. This is really important thing both for whole farm and for yield, is that you must be grown under a processor contract. And that may be not available for everyone. Be planted for harvest as hemp in accordance with, again, the requirements of that process. So you can't deviate from that. And be planted to a minimum of 5 acres or 20 acres for grain and fiber. And it's interesting, they do constrain practices, cannot be interplanted with another crop in established, which is actually is a problem for a lot of other crops too. So these are the countries. You can find this on the RMA website, and anyone who's interested can contact me and I can work with them if they need to know. But these are the counties where it's available. I was trying to look at that map, and the ones where you actually have it required, there seem to be a little bit of overlap, but probably not entirely. Why only these counties? I don't know the answer to that. It's some bureaucrat decided. Probably because there was some history of growing cannabis or hemp previously in those. Maybe that's where the piloted programs were previous to the change in the 2018 Farm Bill. Probably the number one of those reasons. Basics, again, it's a yield risk policy only. Does not, if you have change in price during the year, it's not going to cover that loss. Actual production insures against yield losses due to natural causes. These are often called multiple peril policies because of any of these perils. And the producer selects the amount of an average yield to insure from 50 to 75%, in some areas up to 85% covered. No crop insurance policy in the United States covers, well, there's a little stipulation, sometimes up to 90 with an additional provisional policy, but around 85% is the maximum. So you never get full coverage of 100% loss, but hemp is limited to 75%. So in general, if you think about that, that means that you could have 25% loss and not really see any benefits from insurance. The producer also elects the percent of the predicted price to insure between 55 and 100% of the crop's price. This is established by RMA. And they actually differentiate these projected prices from the different kinds of the flour, the grain, and the fiber. They're distinguished in terms of the prices. How they come up with these prices is amazing to me. I don't know how they do it. They probably use the best available evidence to do it. And I'm sure they're probably lower than some people actually experience, which could also affect whether one will want to use this program or not. If the harvest price, any appraisal production is less than the yield insured, the producer is paid a based on the difference. So in other words, you basically, that's how you are paid. Calculated by the difference between that price that was established and the loss that was substantiated. Now, whole farm is the other way to insure hemp, but it's not whole farm revenue is, unfortunately, I think, in my opinion, not utilized by many farmers in the country, and certainly not utilized by many farmers even in California, even though it's available. This is an important point, in every single county in California. So technically speaking, anyone can insure hemp in any county in the state of California if they do it through whole farm revenue, not through a yield risk. And as it states, it's farm revenue. It also protects against both yield and price risk, which is an advantage. And it can be insured in this way, because whole farm revenue is really ensuring the potential of the farm to produce revenue based on its historical record of being able to produce revenue. And so you're essentially ensuring the revenue, not any specific crop. And therefore, hemp can be one of those crops that the whole farm produces. And so again, that's a very different way of thinking about crop insurance. You're not insuring the hemp, but you're insuring it as part of your overall operation. And there could be some advantages to that, because maybe if you're trying hemp and you want to insure other things, you can insure the whole kit and caboodle at the same time. For the 2020 year, it's available for fiber, flower, and seed in all counties in California under whole farm. And yield is available for the 2021 for flower in those counties I mentioned. Hemp coverage restrictions, again, producers can, if they have a contract for the purchase of the hemp, meet all applicable states, the laws that we just discovered, we just discussed, and provisions state that the hemp having, this is the THC, hot hemp, is not an insurable cause of risk. Say that again, the THC above that is not an insurable cause of risk. And of course, this may be one of the greatest risks, but it's one that is not covered. And so again, whole farm can be any crop or livestock products. There's a couple of things like pet animals, you can't do that. Does not cover on-farm value added products. Grapes, not grape jam. So if you were to take your hemp and make it into a product and then sell it, you would have to take out the value added and only be insuring the actual productive thing under whole farm particularly. It's again, all counties, and any marketing retail chain can be, anyway, it doesn't matter where you sell it in terms of getting insurance for your production. Again, whole farm is the only federal option for many crops in many counties. So again, all those counties that you can't get yield insurance or the APA insurance is available for whole farm to be insured. Provides insurance for diverse operations. It's kind of made somewhat for at least some diverse operations, because again, it doesn't insure any specific crop, but the whole farm's capacity to generate revenue. So some things may go up, some things may go down, but you are kind of secure in the revenue risk that you're taking overall. In a sense, organic prices is embedded to the extent that your history has been growing organic and your revenue has generated organic value. That is the basis upon which you insure your revenue, and therefore it's embedded that organic value because it's likely to be higher. Having crop insurance can assist in qualifying for loans, and that's another reason why you might, although we found that, again, in this discussion, that banks and others are not necessarily so interested in supporting hemp, but having insurance backing up may make it more likely or possible. I'm not advancing for some reason. Oh, there we go. How to request a quote. First, you got to get a crop insurance agent. This website, this tool is really, really good. It even tells you if there's a Spanish language spoken at the agent's location, and you can just go on, and it's a pretty neat, it's actually been improved over the years, and it's a pretty neat fund to find a crop insurance agent. So you have to do that. The other thing is that I want to talk a little bit about agents. I mean, again, hemp, like everything being new, both whole farm revenue and even the yield APH policies are probably not too many of those have been written. In fact, I looked, and they're very limited amount were actually taken out for APH hemp in California. There were some, but it's like 10 or something like that. A very small number So it has not been sold readily, which will make most crop insurance agents nervous, as will whole farm, because they haven't utilized that as much and as often. They probably have not used it with hemp. So therefore, they'll be a little bit nervous. However, if these are federally subsidized programs, they must provide a quote. They must work with you. But again, if an agent is balking, you want to work with one who is willing and interested in helping, rather than one who's going to kind of say, oh, this is crazy, don't go with it. So really, kind of shop around for your agent. This is something I tell everyone when I do crop insurance talk, is that, it's great, you get your product, you think you know what you're being insured, all that, but remember that when you make a claim, there's a process. And if anybody has gone through any kind of insurance claims for any product, and I'm not just talking about agriculture, you will know that then is the time when you must substantiate your loss. And there's even a rule that you must, if you have a loss, it's either price and or yield related, depending on whether you have whole farm or the yield, must report that loss 72 hours in advance of the loss. And you must document your loss, and do that carefully, because just like all insurance, the insurance folks, the companies, it's not the federal government, it's the companies, they have all the fine print. They are not, they're not necessarily trying to find you the best indemnity payment or pay you out to the most. They are going to be scrupulous about making sure that you get paid what you deserve to get paid, and that is often contested. And so therefore having evidence is very important. The closing date is still available for both APH and whole farm revenue in California. It's 2/28 coming up. So if you're interested in getting insurance, find an agent, talk to them, get them to run a quote for both APH if you're in that county, or whole farm revenue, and you decide whether it's beneficial or not for you. Terminate details of kind of accumulation. Okay, so sharing between you and the agent and the provider, be satisfied that you are getting what you want. Basically, that you are ensuring that you know what your historic approved revenue will be, that the level of insurance is what you want, that if you had 100% loss, that would be worth the cost of it. Again, APH Hemp provides only yield risk, whereas whole farm does the price risk. Whole farm is not designed for a single crop like hemp, but really for the whole farm. So it will take a little more work to run a quote for whole farm with the inclusion of hemp in your farm. But again, it can be done by your agent. Crop insurance is often needed, again, for the loans, and good record keeping. It's particularly true for whole farm revenue. They have to document all the historic crops you did and what you expect to get in the future. So there's a little bit of a process there, particularly for whole farm. Hemp would be a little bit easier, but again, that would depend on your own history. We have lots of things on our ATRA publication on crop insurance. I think I wrote all of those. So anyway, they're there, and you can always contact me. We also ran a project that was 5 years. Is Organic Farming Risky? It's an excellent book on understanding both the history, research, and some practical aspects of organic farming insurance. And we have, again, all the publications that we have. And there's my contact information. Again, I put it in the chat. Feel free to call me anytime to talk about this. I enjoy talking about it. Thanks.
Jeff, thank you very much. That was pretty enlightening, although, but I have a question. Can you discuss briefly about kind of cropping history with the whole farm revenue? Because so many farmers don't have much of a cropping history with hemp. I mean, how far back do they have to go to provide kind of information about revenues to qualify if they want to grow hemp, say next year, but they haven't grown it previously? Would they be able to avail themselves of WFRP?
Absolutely, they would. And it's a bit confusing because, again, I think the thought process always is that we're covering the crop, aren't we, when we cover insurance? And we're not really covering the crop with whole farm revenue. We're covering the history and the potential of the farm to produce a revenue. And it doesn't say, they will look, of course, they determine your capacity to generate a revenue based on your taxes, not on a farm plan. So if you have 5 years of history and you were, let's just say your average approved revenue was 100,000 over the last 5 years. Again, I should have been clear, whole farm revenue cannot be acquired by somebody in their very, very first year of operation. And if they're a beginning farmer, which is defined as 10 years or less of farming, then they can do it with 3 years of actual, they have to have been a farmer for 3 years. So if you're a first year farmer, and that's not growing hemp or anything, just for whole farm, you can't get whole farm at all unless you have 3 years of revenue generation potential. So that is one limitation of farm. So yes, it's available in every county, but it's only to quote farmers with at least 3 years of historical experience growing. And then that basis becomes your approved revenue. Then when you go to calculate what your expected revenue is, then you can include hemp in there if that's your first year growing it. Now, the way they will determine the value of that will be something called a T, or county average yield, which they actually have in every county in California. Now, you might ask, well, how the heck do they know what the average county yield of hemp is in every county in California? And they made some really pretty good guesstimates, but they're there and they were estimated. Whether they're legit or not, I don't know. And if you look at them as an experienced hemp grower, I'd be interested in saying whether those seem even legitimate, but they have come up with them. And that will be the basis of determining the value of the hemp in the year of the insurance. But usually that's a lower, and anyway, I'm getting complicated here very quickly, but the short answer is yes, you can be a first, if you have the 3 years of historical growing, you can include hemp in your year of insurance and it will be covered again as part of the whole farm's revenue.
Okay, well, thank you. Let me see, I'm trying to get my screen to advance to, there we go. So we're heading on to the very end of the presentation now. And Jeff, again, thank you very much for that. I mean, crop insurance is kind of an esoteric kind of thing, but in a risky market like this, it's might be a good thing to just look into it at the very least. And Locke, thank you very much for your presentation on CDFA rules and regs. That provided some really good resources for interested folks. Please do take time to go to this SurveyMonkey, this valuation. We're required to provide the extension risk management education folks with some evaluations from participants of these events, but also it will help inform future events. Like if you're a farmer growing hemp, what information do you need, or what information is most important to you? And then we will focus on those types of information in the next events. So I think, unless there's any other final questions, if you would post them to the chat, we can get some responses to you. I think several of our presenters are no longer online, but thank you all for participating. It's been, to me, very enlightening, and I had a little bit of a background on hemp, but if you have any questions for Akasha or any of the other presenters, now's the time. Sandor, actually, there's a question for Sandor from Seth Rosmarin, who's really been a good active informational participant, said, okay, thanks, Bogdan. But the COA is for the cannabinoids. Same goes for the cultivar. Like the cannabinoid profile will be assigned to that specific cultivar. Sandor, do you understand that question? And can you interpret it for a layman?
Well, I mean, I believe his question was about California certified seeds. And I mean, that when you try and bring a seed in from out of state, or I believe there are actually some California certified seeds right now, but there certainly aren't very many to speak of. But if you, I mean, I brought seeds in from out of state, so you just have to go to your local ag commissioner and just say, look, these are the seeds that I brought in. Here's the COA that shows the flower cannabinoid test on this crop, and then they'll okay. Then I mean, it's a pretty basic process to bring seeds into California. They just want to know where they're coming from, if they're hot or not, and you know, and that's about the extent of it. It wasn't a real big hurdle to jump over. I would honestly say that the whole obtaining a permit process and getting your seeds okayed by the local ag commissioner, I mean, I think we probably did it in 2 or 3 days. It was pretty benign.
Okay, thank you. And just since we do have a couple minutes before the 12 o'clock expiration date, I guess, I do have a couple more questions. And one of them is if you could have influence on what hemp researchers were doing, what kinds of information or resources would you ask them to develop? And Sandor, start with you and then go to Akasha and Phil.
Well, you guys, we brought up we kind of touched on it in something that's kind of dear to me. I would really like more studies to be done on animal feeds. You know, closer planting, you know, like they were saying 36 inches to 48 inches, you know, in between plants. I mean, if you look at the Chinese market and the industrial market, I mean, they have about 6 inches in between plants. And that's why when they're able to run combines on them, and, you know, the combine can actually handle the stalk because it's really not much bigger than a corn stalk. So for a lot of parts of our country, you know, the Smokeable flower thing, it's here for now, and who knows how long it's going to be here, but it's really going to get more down to the boutique level. I mean, as for hemp, for a, you know, real industrial type crop, I mean, we really need to look to these other countries that have been doing it for 100 years. And, you know, and they're obviously in China, they're not out there cutting industrial hemp down by hand. I mean, it's all mechanized, and they have the proper headers to do it. And so, you know, I think I would love to see more information come out on animal feeds for sure. I mean, I really think that the dairy industry and the beef cattle industry, I think the sky's the limit with that.
And that 6-inch spacing, is that for a fiber crop, or what is their market for that?
That's how they do fiber crops, is, you know, and you could also do, you know, you could do animal feed crops as well that way.
Okay.
You know, they just go a little bit faster. You know, they just kind of go, it's just a little bit faster of an ordeal. They're not, you know, I mean, and the same thing with us with these auto flowers that we have. I mean, there's definitely a great opportunity depending on your region of the country to get 2, 3, 4 crops off a year. I mean, you know, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards now going forward, is I would like to see myself have weekly harvests of, you know, take down 2 or 3 houses every week and replant. And that way I don't have this huge crop coming down on my head all at one time. Because, you know, as we all know, having tens of thousands of pounds coming down on you at one time is just with 2 weeks to harvest is just, it's an absolute nightmare. So, you know, with the autoflowers are starting to catch up. I mean, you know, as Akasha and Phil said, they're still genetically, they're kind of all over the place. But, you know, I've got a couple autoflower, organic autoflower producers in the Salinas Valley area that are starting to show some, you know, pretty nice results with what they have. So, you know, I think just the easier we can make it for ourselves, the better off it's going to be. I mean, that's just, you know, as with any type of farming, and we're still in a learn as we go type of situation, but you know, just you just got to make it easier on ourselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And Akasha or Phil, what if you could influence what hemp researchers were looking at, what would be your druthers?
I would just say there's still a little ways to go with fertilizer and pest control.
Just a little ways.
A little ways to go. I'm hoping that the research that Rodell's going to be doing will help out on that. But, I remember the days when things were planted on single rows. I remember when 40-inch beds, 2 rows per bed, it was a big deal. And so I get the row spacing and I get the plant spacing, but I really do believe there's still, research we can do on that too, to see, because there's CBD, fiber, there's so much.
And food, yeah.
Yeah, and food. I don't, there's a lot of research we need. I don't know where to start.
Well, it sounds like genetics, like getting,
Sure. Sure.
genetics for the food part, for the fiber part, for the flower part.
And they're all going to have different spacings and different beds. And yeah.
Akasha.
I mean, I think what both of you have said is right on. I mean, I don't say the government has to help or corporations have to help, but subsidizing, these research institutes or research so that we can look at, doing hemp insulation. And I mean, I really think the building aspect of it too is a huge component to the success of this crop. And we did have a number of, we had 2 nonprofit groups that we gave, or one nonprofit, another group that we gave, that were doing some studies and tests on, providing hemp insulation in some assisted homes using the stock that we provided them, and, hempcrete. And, it comes down to just having the infrastructure to support these type of activities. And right now it's all being funded by, individuals like ourselves. And, I think that's the next wave. And we may not be the ones that are doing it. We took all the arrows, but at least that's probably the next step, I think, that's happening. And it'll both, from a food, and how do we be competitive? I mean, how can America, is this a security? Is food production something we consider to be a national security? Is it important to us and this has all been talked about with farming for the last century. I mean, is it important to us to be able to provide our own food and material that we need to support and run our society, or are we going to take it from other countries all the time? And China's subsidized most of this, not to mention their labor wages, but I mean, they subsidize a lot of this infrastructure to be able to do it. And I think if we really want to be competitive, and I don't know how we compete labor wise, but if we want to be competitive, at least in being able to provide some of this food and medicine. And I mean, I do have people that call us and say, look, I want to buy your product, because I don't trust how it's being grown in China. Now, granted, most of the stuff that's coming from China medicinally is isolate, and it might have all been taken out, whatever impurities might have been taken out of there. But there's also kind of a, are we being stewards? Are we, do we want to bring back, sustainability to farming? And part of it is an economic aspect too that we have to look at. But I think there's also just, consciously, if we can afford it, how do we do it? So a good think tank coming together, both government, corporation, and and farming to help really. I love that movie. I keep Kiss the Ground, and Rodell's presented in that. I mean, I just think hemp is dead on to being what we can do to help, heal this planet and heal ourselves. So, Rodell's doing some study. I jumped off the call here. Rodell's, talking about taking a couple acres. We're doing a cover crop on our back 30 acres right now. And, she wants to crimp it, just leave it and try some testing with just, can we do direct seed on an acre or two, and then keep one bed, also keeping a bed also just as it is without disking or tilling it, and just, doing these kind of tests. But how do you extrapolate that to big ag? I don't know yet. I think that's That's Rodale's, one of their missions.
Well, and the farmers generally are the ones on the bleeding edge of information development. And how can hemp perhaps fit into any of, California has over 450 different crops, but the Midwest could certainly use with some diversification from corn, soybean, wheat,
Okay.
And hemp would be a great crop but how can hemp fit into a rotation? There's still a lot of unanswered questions, I guess, and but I think it can help heal the planet too, and it's a good crop to help revitalize our degraded soils. And I take your point very well, Akasha, as well as Sandor. I think it can extract a bunch of toxins, and then we got to figure out what to do with them after. But
You can't just till it back in. That's the problem.
That's right.
Technically, you should remove it to a hazardous waste material site.
Yep.
Which is the logistics on that are, that's beyond scope.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of this. It's 12 o'clock noon, and I sure appreciate participants hanging in there. It's been 3 hours of pretty information dense download, but I really want to applaud Sandra, you and Akasha and Phil and Jeff and Dr. Gordon, as well as Locke Fan, for presenting this information. It's much needed, and hopefully, and please don't forget to go to the SurveyMonkey evaluation. That will inform future events, and I hope they're as good and information dense as this. And so thank you all. Any last words?
Rex, thank you for putting it all together. You're the one that did it. Thank you.
Well, it takes a village, right?
It does. We'll see you all later.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Be safe.
Bye. Bye.